Have you ever wondered why ancient myths and legends feel so vivid, so gripping, even after thousands of years? It's almost as if they were designed to stick in our minds, to be retold around campfires and in great halls, generation after generation. But what if these stories weren't just meant to entertain or to explain the mysteries of the world? What if they served a far more practical and even tactical purpose? For centuries, the greatest military minds didn't always learn their craft from scrolls or formal academies. Instead, they absorbed strategy through epic tales, stories where cunning, courage, and clever maneuvers were celebrated in the deeds of heroes and the whims of gods. These narratives weren't just folklore, they were lessons in disguise, sophisticated tools to pass down the art of war without ever naming it outright. Think about the story of the Trojan Horse. On the surface, it's a thrilling climax to the Trojan War, a giant wooden horse offered as a gift, hiding Greek soldiers who emerge under cover of night to conquer the city. But look closer, and you'll see it's a masterclass in deception, surprise, and psychological warfare. It teaches that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't strength alone, but ingenuity. Or consider the battles among gods in various mythologies, where alliances shift, strategies evolve, and the outcomes hinge on more than brute force. These stories were repeated not just for their drama, but because they encoded essential principles of leadership, logistics, and tactical innovation. They turned abstract concepts into memorable, emotionally charged narratives that any aspiring leader or warrior could internalize. This video is a journey into that hidden world, a place where myth and military science intertwine. We'll explore how ancient civilizations from Greece to India, from Mesopotamia to Scandinavia, embedded complex warfare doctrines into their most cherished stories. You'll discover how these tales preserved crucial knowledge across centuries, ensuring that strategic wisdom survived even when empires fell and libraries burned. By the end, you won't just see these epics as entertaining legends. You'll recognize them as ingenious teaching tools, layered with meaning and purpose. So settle in and let's pull back the curtain on one of history's most fascinating secrets: how epic tales were crafted to teach military tactics in disguise. Imagine a world without textbooks, without formal schools for generals, where the collective wisdom of how to command an army, outmaneuver an enemy, or inspire loyalty in troops could be lost in a single generation. This was the reality for ancient civilizations. Their survival depended on finding a way to make complex knowledge unforgettable, and they discovered the ultimate tool for this was not a dry manual, but a thrilling story. The very origins of military training are deeply rooted in this oral tradition, where epic poetry and myth became the invisible academies for aspiring leaders. These weren't just tales told for amusement around a fire, they were sophisticated, living curricula. Consider the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest stories ever recorded. On one level, it's a profound exploration of friendship, mortality, and the quest for meaning. But woven into its fabric are clear lessons on leadership. Gilgamesh begins as a tyrannical king, exhausting his people with his demands. His journey with Enkidu is a transformation from a selfish ruler into a leader who understands his duties to his city and his people. For an ancient listener, this narrative arc illustrated the dangers of poor leadership and the qualities courage, empathy, and wisdom that make a king worth following. It was a case study in governance and command, disguised as a hero's adventure. This practice was universal. In the sprawling Indian epic, the Mahabharata, we find what might be the most comprehensive ancient treatise on statecraft and warfare ever embedded in a story. The lengthy discourse known as the Bhagavad Gita is, at its heart, a lesson delivered on a battlefield about duty, righteousness, and the moral complexities of war. But the epic as a whole is filled with detailed descriptions of military formations like the intricate Chakravyuha battlefield strategies, espionage, diplomacy, and the ethical dilemmas faced by commanders. It presented every conceivable scenario a leader might face, not as a list of rules, but through the gripping, emotional struggles of its characters. You didn't memorize the steps to break a battle formation. You remembered the tragic story of Abhimanyu, who knew how to enter the Chakravyuha but not how to exit it, a stark lesson on the necessity of complete intelligence and planning. The custodians of this knowledge were the storytellers, bards, skalds, and rishis who were far more than mere entertainers. They were revered as historians, priests, and strategic advisors. A skilled storyteller could subtly emphasize a particular tactical maneuver or a character's strategic decision, tailoring the emphasis to suit the current challenges faced by their audience. If a kingdom was struggling with a powerful neighbor, the bard might highlight tales of cunning alliances or guerrilla tactics from the past. This ensured the lessons remained dynamically relevant, constantly refined by each generation without altering the core of the story itself. This method of disguised learning was incredibly resilient. Written records could be burned, libraries could fall, but a story, once deeply embedded in a culture's identity, was nearly indestructible. It could travel with refugees, be whispered in secret, and survive the collapse of empires. The artistry of these epics, their rhythm, their rhyme, their compelling emotional core acted as a perfect preservation system. Listeners didn't have to consciously study. They absorbed strategic principles through the triumphs and failures of their heroes, internalizing a vast library of military wisdom without ever cracking open a single scroll. And so we arrive at what is perhaps the most iconic example of this entire concept, a story so powerful that its name is still used today to describe a type of digital threat, the Trojan Horse. This isn't just a tale, it's a perfect, self-contained lecture on the art of deception. Everyone knows the basic plot. After a fruitless 10-year siege, the Greek army appears to sail away, leaving behind a giant wooden horse as an offering to the goddess Athena. The Trojans, believing they have won, drag the massive gift inside their impregnable walls. Under cover of night, the hidden Greek soldiers creep out, open the city gates for their returning comrades, and Troy falls in a single, devastating blow. It's a thrilling narrative, but for a military mind, every single beat of this story is a deliberate lesson. The first principle it demonstrates is intelligence and reconnaissance. The Greeks didn't just build a random object, they crafted something specifically designed to appeal to Trojan religious and cultural sensibilities. This shows a deep understanding of their enemy's psychology, their values, and their likely reactions. It teaches that effective strategy requires knowing your opponent better than they know themselves. Then comes the masterstroke of misdirection. The entire Greek fleet doesn't just leave, they make a show of it, creating a powerful visual illusion of defeat and departure. This plays directly into the second key lesson, exploiting enemy overconfidence. The Trojans' joy at their perceived victory clouded their judgment. They ignored the warnings of the priest Laocoon, who famously said, "I fear the Greeks, even those bearing gifts." This part of the story serves as a critical cautionary tale about the dangers of pride and the necessity of healthy suspicion, even in moments of triumph. But the genius of the Trojan horse as a teaching tool goes even deeper. It encapsulates the concept of asymmetric warfare. The Greeks were faced with a problem that sheer force could not solve: the immense fortified walls of Troy. Instead of continuing a conventional assault, they redefined the battlefield itself. They moved the conflict from the plain outside the walls to the very heart of the city, turning the Trojans' greatest strength, their defenses, into a trap. The horse itself was a weapon, but not in the traditional sense. Its power was entirely psychological until the precise moment it was activated. This teaches the value of patience, of investing time and resources into a single, decisive plan rather than endless, costly frontal attacks. Historians and archaeologists have long debated whether the Trojan horse was a literal event or a powerful metaphor for the kind of siegecraft common in the ancient world. There are records of armies using similar ruses, like the Babylonian king Hammurabi diverting a city's water supply, or other generals using hidden tunnels or soldiers concealed in supply carts. The specific horse may be mythological, but the tactic it represents was very real. By encoding this complex, multi-layered strategic doctrine into such a memorable and emotionally charged story, the ancient bards ensured that the lesson would never be forgotten. A young soldier listening to the epic wouldn't just remember a cool story about a horse. He would internalize a fundamental truth of warfare, that the mind is the ultimate battleground, and victory often goes to those who can outthink, not just outfight, their opponent. Now, let's shift our gaze from the shores of the Mediterranean to the ancient plains of India, where we find an even more profound and intricate example of strategic teaching woven into epic poetry. The Mahabharata is not just a story, it's a vast universe of human experience, a sprawling narrative so immense it makes most other epics seem like short stories. And at the very heart of this colossal work, right on the precipice of an apocalyptic war, sits a compact philosophical jewel known as the Bhagavad Gita. On the surface, it's a spiritual discourse, a conversation about the soul, duty, and the nature of reality. But when you listen with the ear of a strategist, it reveals itself as one of the most sophisticated manuals on leadership and psychological readiness ever composed. Picture the scene. Two massive armies are arrayed on the field of Kurukshetra, poised for a conflict that will decide the fate of a kingdom. In the middle, the great archer Prince Arjuna, one of the finest warriors of his age, asks his charioteer, Lord Krishna, to drive him into the no-man's land between the two forces so he can survey the enemy. But as he looks out, he doesn't see an opposing army. He sees his teachers, his cousins, his elders, the very fabric of his family and community. His bow drops from his hand. He is utterly paralyzed by a moral and emotional crisis, consumed by doubt about the righteousness of the war and the horrific cost of victory. This moment of supreme psychological collapse is where the Gita begins. It's a scenario any commander throughout history would recognize: the crushing weight of responsibility, the fear of catastrophic loss, the ethical ambiguity of action. Krishna's response to Arjuna's despair is a masterclass in restoring a leader's resolve, and it operates on multiple levels. He begins not with a command, but with logic, outlining the immutable nature of the soul to alleviate Arjuna's fear of causing death. Then he moves to a concept central to both philosophy and strategy: dharma, or sacred duty. Krishna argues that as a warrior, Arjuna's dharma is to fight a just war. To abandon his post out of misplaced pity would be a dereliction of that duty, creating greater chaos and adharma, or disorder, in the world. This is a crucial lesson for any leader: the necessity of making difficult, even painful decisions for a larger objective, without being crippled by emotional attachment to the outcome. He teaches the principle of nishkama karma, acting with right intention, but relinquishing obsession over the results. For a general, this translates to meticulous planning and execution, while accepting that the fog of war means not every variable can be controlled. It's about focusing on the duty of command itself, not being mentally defeated by the fear of failure or the desire for personal glory. But the Gita's strategic wisdom goes far beyond stoic resolve. It delves deep into the psychology of the warrior. Krishna describes the disciplined mind as a lamp in a windless place, steady and unwavering. An agitated mind clouded by attachment, fear, or anger is incapable of sound judgment. This is a direct lesson in emotional intelligence for military command. A leader whose mind is turbulent will make impulsive, disastrous decisions. The text provides a framework for mental training, for cultivating a state of inner equilibrium that remains intact even amidst the chaos of battle. This mental fortitude enables a commander to assess situations clearly, adapt strategies instantly, and inspire confidence in their troops. The entire dialogue is a metaphor for the internal battle that must be won before the external one can even begin. The brilliance of embedding this within the Mahabharata is that the listener doesn't just hear the philosophy, they are fully invested in Arjuna's personal struggle. They feel his despair and then experience, through him, the process of regaining clarity and purpose. The abstract concept of duty becomes viscerally real. The lesson on mental discipline is not a dry lecture, it's a transformative character moment. By the end of the discourse, Arjuna picks up his bow with a calm determination, not with bloodlust, but with a clear understanding of his role in the larger framework of what must be done. This is the ultimate goal of this disguised teaching, to forge leaders who are not just skilled tacticians, but wise, resilient, and ethically grounded individuals, capable of bearing the immense psychological burdens of command. While the Bhagavad Gita offers a deep dive into a commander's inner world, another cornerstone of Western literature, Homer's Illiad, gives us a sprawling, panoramic view of leadership in action, complete with all its messy human complications. This isn't a story about a single general's enlightenment. It's a vast, dramatic case study of an entire command structure under immense strain, showing us precisely how not to lead an army, and in doing so, teaching us everything about what true leadership requires. The epic's famous rage of Achilles is far more than a personal tantrum. It's a catastrophic failure in military management that nearly costs the Greeks the entire war, serving as an eternal warning about the fragility of morale and the high cost of pride. At the heart of this failure is the strained relationship between the supreme commander, Agamnon, and his greatest warrior, Achilles. Their conflict erupts not over a matter of grand strategy, but over a point of honor and prize distribution, the captured woman Briseis. When Agamnon, fearing a loss of face, uses his authority to seize Achilles' prize, he makes a fatal error in judgment. He prioritizes his personal status over the operational effectiveness of his entire army. This single act of poor leadership demonstrates a critical lesson. Authority is not the same as effective command. A leader must be seen as just and worthy of respect. When they act like a tyrant, they risk fracturing the very unity that gives an army its strength. Achilles' subsequent withdrawal is a devastating blow, not just because they lose their best fighter, but because it creates a schism, a civil war within the Greek coalition. The resulting casualties are a direct consequence of this internal discord, a powerful lesson that an army's greatest vulnerability can often come from within its own command tent. But Homer doesn't just show us failed leadership, he provides a compelling counterpoint on the other side of the Trojan walls. Prince Hector embodies the virtues Agamnon lacks. His leadership is not derived from a title, but from earned respect, profound personal courage, and a deep sense of responsibility, not just to his father the king, but to every citizen of Troy. We see him constantly moving among his troops, boosting their spirits, making tactical adjustments, and bearing the immense psychological weight of knowing the safety of his family and city rests on his shoulders. His famous farewell to his wife Andromache and their infant son is one of the most human moments in the epic, revealing the terrible personal cost of command. Hector fights not for glory or plunder, but out of duty to his people. This juxtaposition is masterful. The Greek commander motivated by selfish pride, the Trojan prince by selfless sacrifice. It forces the listener to ask themselves which leader they would truly follow into battle. Beyond these personal dramas, the Iliad is remarkably detailed in its depiction of the nuts and bolts of ancient warfare, offering a holistic education for any aspiring commander. Homer doesn't just describe heroic duels, he shows the importance of logistics, from the need to protect supply ships to the challenge of maintaining a large force on a foreign shore for 10 long years. The epic catalogues troop deployments, the use of scouts and intelligence, and the critical role of field medicine, as seen in the Machaon, the healer who is deemed as valuable as a company of soldiers. We see the ebb and flow of battle, how momentum shifts, and how the morale of an entire army can hinge on the success or failure of a single champion. These aren't mere background details, they are integral parts of the narrative, teaching that victory depends on 1,000 small things working in concert: organization, supply, intelligence, and medical support, not just the prowess of a lone hero. Ultimately, the Iliad teaches that brilliant strategy is useless without the emotional intelligence to manage the complex human beings who must execute it. A general must understand pride, honor, fear, and loyalty. They must know how to motivate, when to concede, and how to forge a diverse group of individuals into a single, cohesive force. Through the tragic flaws of Agamnon, the devastating rage of Achilles, and the noble burden carried by Hector, the epic provides a complete and timeless curriculum on the art of command, proving that the most enduring lessons on how to lead an army are found not in a manual of rules, but in the deeply human stories of those who have succeeded and failed at the task. From the sun-drenched battlefields of Troy and Kurukshetra, we now journey to the mist-shrouded fjords and frozen forests of the north, where a different kind of warfare was being immortalized in story. The Norse sagas present a stark contrast to the massive, set-piece battles of Greek or Indian epics. Here, victory rarely belonged to the largest army. It belonged to the cleverest, the most adaptable, and the most unpredictable. These stories are masterclasses in asymmetric warfare, celebrating the tactical brilliance of the ambush, the raid, and the clever ruse, perfectly mirroring the Viking way of war that struck fear into the heart of medieval Europe. Consider the quintessential Viking military operation, the raid. It wasn't about conquest or holding territory in that initial moment. It was about applying maximum pressure with minimal risk, achieving overwhelming force at a specific point for a specific time. The sagas are practically training manuals for this doctrine. In the saga of the Volsungs, the hero Sigurd doesn't charge headlong at the dragon Fafnir. He understands the brute force is a fool's game. Instead, he digs a pit in the path the dragon uses to crawl to its watering hole, hiding within it and striking upward into the beast's soft underbelly as it passes over him. This is more than a heroic feat. It's a detailed lesson in using terrain to negate an opponent's advantage, in patience, and in targeting a critical vulnerability. The story glorifies not strength, but preparation and intelligent application of force. This emphasis on cunning over sheer power is a recurring theme. Heroes are constantly overcoming stronger foes through what the Norse called veil, a word meaning trick, artifice, or clever stratagem. These aren't seen as dishonorable deceptions, but as the highest form of practical intelligence. A warrior who falls for a simple trick was, in the Norse worldview, simply not a very good warrior. The sagas taught that the battlefield was a contest of wits as much as weapons. A listener would learn to always be thinking several moves ahead, to expect the unexpected from their enemy, and to never underestimate a seemingly weaker opponent. Beyond the individual ambush, the sagas illustrate the critical operational art of reconnaissance. Long before a blade is drawn, the protagonists are gathering intelligence. They send out scouts, they talk to travelers, they observe patterns of behavior. In Egil's saga, the titular hero often relies on information about an enemy's routines, the layout of their hall, or their personal alliances to plan his moves. This meticulous pre-battle work is given as much narrative weight as the combat itself, teaching that success is often determined long before the first arrow is loosed. It's a lesson in the value of information, of understanding an enemy's habits, weaknesses, and the geography they operate in. For a Viking crew 1,000 miles from home with no hope of reinforcement, this kind of intelligence wasn't just helpful, it was the difference between a rich plunder and a mass grave. Furthermore, these stories codify the psychological impact of such tactics. The sudden, shocking violence of a well-executed ambush or a nighttime raid on a monastery wasn't just physically devastating, it was a weapon aimed at the mind. It created an aura of invincibility and terror that could cause armies to crumble before a fight even began. The sagas capture this perfectly, showing how a reputation for cunning and ruthlessness becomes a strategic asset in itself. By constantly recounting tales where the heroes use fear and surprise, the narratives taught that morale is a tangible target. Shattering an enemy's will to fight could be a far more efficient path to victory than defeating them in a protracted battle. Ultimately, the Norse sagas served as the perfect cultural repository for a society built on mobility and initiative. They didn't teach how to manage vast supply lines or deploy legions in formation, skills suited for empires. Instead, they taught how a small, highly motivated, and brilliantly led force could outmaneuver and humiliate a far more powerful adversary. They celebrated the virtues of self-reliance, quick thinking, and audacity. By wrapping these essential survival skills in the thrilling, bloody, and unforgettable adventures of legendary heroes, the Viking Age ensured that every generation would internalize the core principles of their unique and devastatingly effective art of war. Now, let's travel from the frozen north to the warm, spice-scented nights of the Middle East, where we encounter perhaps the most overt and self-aware example of strategic storytelling in all of world literature, the Arabian Nights. This entire collection is built upon a foundation that is, in itself, a profound and urgent lesson in strategy. The frame story of Scheherazade is not just a pretty wrapping for the tales, it is a masterclass in high-stakes psychological and political maneuvering. A king, betrayed and enraged, has taken a brutal vow to marry a new virgin each night and have her executed at dawn to prevent any future betrayal. Scheherazade, the vizier's brilliantly clever daughter, volunteers to become the next bride with a single, audacious plan. She will use the power of narrative to stay her own execution. Her weapon is not a sword but a story, and her strategy is one of calculated delay and incremental persuasion. Each night she begins a new tale, weaving it with such skill and suspense that as dawn breaks, the king is left desperate to hear the conclusion. He spares her life for one more day, and so the cycle continues for 1001 nights. This is a real-time demonstration of using an opponent's own desires and curiosity against them. Scheherazade understands the king's intellectual and emotional needs better than he does himself. She offers him not confrontation, but an irresistible distraction, a world of enchantment that gradually rebuilds his capacity for empathy and trust. Her ultimate objective is nothing less than the complete transformation of a tyrant and the salvation of an entire kingdom's women. She achieves this not through force, but through the patient, persistent application of narrative, teaching that the most powerful strategies often involve changing the very nature of the game being played. Within the tales she tells, the lessons become even more direct and tactical. Consider the famous story of Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. On its surface, it's a thrilling adventure about a poor woodcutter who stumbles upon a secret treasure trove. But analyze its components, and you find a detailed case study in covert operations and counterintelligence. The Thieves' Lair itself is a lesson in secure logistics, a hidden cave that opens only with the precise verbal password, "Open Sesame." This highlights the critical importance of controlling access to your resources, secure lines of communication, and operational secrecy. Losing control of that secret, as the thieves do when Ali Baba overhears them, is their primary point of failure, a stark warning about operational security. The real strategic genius of the tale, however, is not Ali Baba, but the enslaved woman Morgiana. When the thieves, seeking revenge, attempt to infiltrate Ali Baba's household, first by having their captain pose as an oil merchant with mules carrying hidden soldiers in jars, and later by gaining entry to a feast, Morgiana is the one who thwarts them each time. She doesn't possess great physical strength or an army. She has only her powers of observation, her quick thinking, and her courage. She discovers the hidden soldiers by testing the quality of the oil in one jar, and she recognizes the thief captain at the feast by his concealed dagger and his nervous demeanor. Her actions, pouring boiling oil into the jars to kill the hidden assassins, and then performing a dagger dance at the feast to lethally strike the captain, are brilliant acts of asymmetric warfare. She is the ultimate underdog, using ingenuity and situational awareness to defeat a numerically superior and highly organized enemy force. Morgiana embodies the principle that intelligence, vigilance, and adaptability are the greatest force multipliers on any battlefield, real or metaphorical. This focus on patience, observation, and perfect timing is a recurring theme throughout the Arabian Nights. Heroes and heroines consistently succeed by waiting for the right moment to act, by gathering information meticulously, and by reading the subtle signs others miss. These are not just personality traits, they are core strategic disciplines. A general must know when to hold his forces back and when to commit them fully. A strategist must be able to observe the enemy's patterns and identify the critical vulnerability. By embedding these abstract, high-level concepts within gripping narratives of personal danger, romance, and adventure, the stories made them unforgettable. A young listener wouldn't just remember a rule about patience. They would remember the tense, thrilling story where patience literally saved a life, internalizing the lesson on a much deeper, emotional level. The Arabian Nights, therefore, represents the pinnacle of this ancient tradition of disguised military instruction. It operates on two levels simultaneously: the meta level of Schaherazade's own life or death strategic narrative, and the micro level of the tactical lessons embedded within the individual stories she tells. It demonstrates that storytelling is not a passive art but an active tool, a means to shape perception, manage time, outthink an adversary, and ultimately achieve a seemingly impossible objective. It teaches that the most elegant victory is one where the opponent's mind is so completely engaged that they never even see the checkmate coming. This focus on the psychological and the personal in the Arabian Nights provides a perfect bridge to another epic where the battlefield is not an army but a single, terrifying opponent. In the cold, mead-hallowed halls of the Old English tradition, the Epic of Beowulf presents a masterclass in a different kind of warfare, the psychology and tactics of single combat. While other stories teach us about leading armies, Beowulf zeroes in on the intense, primal confrontation between a hero and a monstrous foe, breaking down each legendary fight into a series of actionable, strategic principles that are as relevant to a modern crisis as they were to a Dark Age warrior. Beowulf's first and most famous confrontation, his brutal wrestling match with the creature Grendel, is a stunning lesson in psychological profiling and environmental control. The Danes have tried everything to defeat this monster, relying on their conventional weapons and strength, and they have failed utterly. Beowulf's first tactical decision is to reject their entire approach. He learns that Grendel, a descendant of Cain, is a creature of rage and envy, immune to man-made weapons due to a magical spell. So Beowulf chooses to fight him on his own terms, hand to hand, without a sword or shield. This is a profound strategic move. He isn't just showing off his strength, he is deliberately stripping the fight down to its essence, neutralizing the enemy's primary advantage by refusing to engage in a contest where that advantage matters. He turns the monster's own brutal nature against him, using Grendel's surprise and confusion as his own weapon. Furthermore, Beowulf uses the environment, the familiar, yet now terrifying space of Heorot Hall. He and his men wait in the darkness, using the confined space to funnel Grendel's attack and ensure the fight happens exactly where and how Beowulf has planned it. The victory isn't achieved by being stronger than the monster, but by being smarter, by understanding the enemy's mind and weaknesses in a way no one else had even considered. But a true hero's work is never done, and the next challenge forces a complete tactical pivot. When Grendel's mother attacks in a grief-stricken fury, Beowulf must now pursue his enemy into her territory, a nightmarish, alien realm at the bottom of a haunted mere. This episode is a masterclass in operating within an opponent's home advantage. The water itself is a weapon, filled with sea monsters that sap his strength and murky darkness that limits his vision. His trusted sword, Hrunting, fails him completely against her supernatural hide. In this moment of supreme crisis, on the verge of being defeated in her own lair, Beowulf must adapt instantly. He spots an ancient, giant-made sword among the hoard of treasures on her cave wall. Seizing it, he uses her own asset against her, turning the tide of the battle. This teaches a critical lesson in flexibility and resourcefulness. When your primary plan fails, you must be able to scan your environment for any available tool and have the presence of mind to use it effectively under extreme pressure. Victory here depends not on predetermined strength, but on rapid, calm adaptation to a fluid and hostile situation. The final act of Beowulf's life, his fatal confrontation with the dragon, presents the most complex and tragic lesson of all. Here, the hero is older, a king who has ruled wisely for 50 years. The threat is no longer a personal tormentor, but an existential one, a force of pure, fiery destruction that threatens his entire kingdom. This battle is a case study in facing a seemingly invincible adversary and the painful transition from individual hero to responsible leader. Beowulf's initial instinct is to meet the threat alone, as he always has. He marches out with a small company but insists on facing the dragon one-on-one, a decision that echoes his youthful courage but ignores the changed nature of the threat. His shield and armor, his trusted tools, are insufficient against the dragon's breath. In this moment of failure, we see the ultimate value of teamwork and sacrifice. All of his retainers flee in terror except for one young warrior, Wiglaf. Remembering the bonds of loyalty and the oaths they have sworn, Wiglaf rushes to his king's aid. Together, they coordinate their attack. Beowulf distracts the beast, creating an opening for Wiglaf to strike a critical blow to its vulnerable underbelly. They win the battle, but Beowulf is mortally wounded. The lesson is profound and bittersweet. Even the greatest individual must eventually rely on others. True leadership involves knowing when to command from the front, but also when to accept help to foster the next generation of heroes who will ensure the safety of the community when you are gone. Beowulf's struggles teach that courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to maintain strategic clarity, flexibility, and unwavering resolve in the face of overwhelming, world-ending terror. While Beowulf teaches us about the psychology of single combat, the ancient Indian epic Ramayana expands the canvas to an immense scale, offering a comprehensive masterclass in the art of building and managing a grand coalition. This isn't just the story of one hero's quest. It's a detailed study in the complex machinery of alliance, diplomacy, and large-scale operational planning. Lord Rama's mission to rescue his wife Sita from the demon king Ravana is impossible for a lone warrior, no matter how skilled. His path to victory is paved not by solitary strength, but by his ability to unite a wildly diverse array of forces under a common banner, teaching that the most powerful weapon in any strategic arsenal is often the trust and cooperation of allies. The foundation of this alliance is his partnership with the Vanaras, a race of forest-dwelling beings led by the mighty Hanuman and King Sugriva. This relationship is far more than a simple pact for military aid. It's a profound lesson in reciprocal diplomacy. Rama doesn't just demand help. He first provides a crucial service by defeating Sugriva's tyrannical brother Vali, restoring the Vanara king to his rightful throne. This act establishes a bond of mutual obligation and deep respect, transforming a potential transactional agreement into a loyal, committed friendship. The epic meticulously shows that true alliances are built on a foundation of earned trust and demonstrated value, not on commands or empty promises. For a ruler or general, this narrative underscores that you must be willing to give before you can expect to receive, and that investing in your allies' stability directly strengthens your own position. Once the alliance is forged, the Ramayana shifts into a breathtaking display of ancient operational art, detailing the immense logistical and intelligence challenges of projecting power across a vast distance. The search for Sita becomes a continent-spanning intelligence operation. Rama and Sugriva don't just send out a few scouts, they deploy entire armies in every cardinal direction with specific, detailed orders on what terrain to cover and what clues to seek. This is a systematic, large-scale reconnaissance effort that would feel familiar to any modern military planner. The success of this mission hinges on the unique strengths of his allies. It is Hanuman's incredible leap across the ocean to the island fortress of Lanka that provides the critical intelligence breakthrough, confirming Sita's location, assessing Ravana's strength, and identifying the morale of his forces. This teaches a vital strategic principle. A wise leader recognizes and leverages the specific, unparalleled capabilities that each ally brings to the coalition. You don't use a master of espionage for frontline combat. You deploy him for the mission that only he can accomplish. Perhaps the most sophisticated strategic lesson comes from within the enemy's own ranks. Vibhishana, the younger brother of Ravana, represents the ultimate intelligence asset, a high-level defector. He repeatedly warns Ravana that his actions are unjust and will lead to ruin, advocating for a diplomatic return of Sita. When his counsel is rejected with scorn and threats, Vibhishana makes the agonizing decision to abandon his family and side with Rama. His arrival is a moment of crisis for the coalition. Sugriva and others are deeply suspicious, arguing that he must be a spy sent to sabotage them. Rama, however, makes a pivotal leadership decision. He declares that he will never turn away anyone who seeks refuge in righteousness. recognizing the immense strategic value of Vibhishana's knowledge. This moment is a brilliant exploration of risk management in intelligence operations. Rama weighs the potential danger of deception against the undeniable value of having a guide who knows the enemy's fortifications, troop deployments, leadership weaknesses, and most importantly, the very heart of the enemy commander. By accepting Vibhishana, Rama gains a living map and a psychological profile of his adversary, demonstrating that understanding an enemy's internal divisions can be a far more devastating weapon than any army. The epic's climax, the Great Battle for Lanka, is a symphony of coordinated allied warfare. It's not a chaotic melee but a series of carefully managed engagements. The Vanaras, with their immense strength and agility, excel at siege warfare, assaulting walls and creating diversions. Rama and his brother Lakshmana, as elite archers, focus on neutralizing Ravana's most powerful champions and commanders. Vibhishana provides constant tactical advice, pointing out which Rakshasa warriors have what vulnerabilities and how to counter their magical illusions. Every element of the coalition works in concert, each playing their designated role. This narrative illustrates that a successful campaign is a complex ecosystem where infantry, special operators, and intelligence assets must work together seamlessly. Victory is achieved not because Rama is the best fighter, but because he is the best leader, a commander who can inspire loyalty, integrate intelligence, and harmonize the distinct strengths of his diverse forces into a single, unstoppable strategic instrument. The Ramayana, therefore, endures as a timeless blueprint for statecraft, teaching that whether rescuing a loved one or defending a kingdom, lasting triumph is always a collective achievement. From the grand coalition warfare of the Ramayana, we now turn to the misty hills of medieval Britain, where a different kind of strategic doctrine was being codified, not in a manual of war, but in the enduring symbolism of the Arthurian legends. These stories, far more than simple tales of chivalry, served as a sophisticated framework for teaching the principles of governance, loyalty, and the strategic vision necessary to hold a kingdom together against both external and internal threats. At the very heart of this symbolic instruction sits the Round Table itself, one of history's most powerful metaphors for military and political organization. This was no ordinary piece of furniture. It was a revolutionary statement on command structure. In an era defined by rigid hierarchies and feuding nobles, the table with no head promoted an ideal of equality among the king's foremost knights. It suggested that the best counsel and the most effective strategies emerge from a collective where every voice can be heard, fostering a sense of shared ownership and commitment to the overall mission. For a medieval baron or knight listening to these tales, the lesson was clear. A leader who silences his best advisors weakens his entire force, while one who cultivates a council of equals builds a far more resilient and motivated command structure. Guiding this entire enterprise was the enigmatic figure of Merlin, who embodies the critical, often overlooked military discipline of intelligence and foresight. He is not merely a magician, he is the ultimate strategic advisor, a master of what we would now call long-term planning and predictive analysis. His prophecies and interventions are not random acts of magic, but represent the painstaking work of understanding an enemy's likely moves, assessing the political landscape, and preparing for multiple eventualities years in advance. When Merlin orchestrates Arthur's birth and rise to power, he is executing a decades-long strategic plan to unite a fractured Britain. He teaches that true power lies not just in the strength of your army on the day of battle, but in the meticulous preparation and deep understanding of the world that happens long before the first sword is drawn. A ruler who ignores this kind of forward-thinking counsel, as Arthur sometimes does regarding Lancelot and Guinevere, does so at his peril, learning the hard way that strategic blindness to internal dynamics can be just as catastrophic as overlooking an external foe. Perhaps the most profound strategic concept within the Arthurian cycle is the quest for the Holy Grail. On one level, it's a spiritual journey, but for a military audience, it functions as a powerful symbol for the necessity of a unifying higher purpose. The Grail is an objective that transcends personal glory or territorial gain. It is a quest that demands the very best from every knight, testing their purity of heart, their perseverance, and their commitment to something greater than themselves. This narrative device taught that an army or a kingdom needs a compelling, shared mission to maintain its cohesion and morale, especially during times of peace or prolonged struggle. It is the ideological glue that holds the fellowship together, preventing the kind of infighting and boredom that can corrode even the strongest fighting force. The failure of most knights to achieve the Grail reinforces another harsh lesson, that such a high purpose is reserved for the most disciplined and dedicated, setting a standard for excellence that elevates the entire organization's aspirations. Yet, for all its lofty ideals, the Arthurian legends are brutally pragmatic about the vulnerabilities of any command structure. The tragic arcs of Lancelot and Mordred serve as extended, devastating case studies on the catastrophic effects of internal discord and the absolute necessity of a strong moral code. Lancelot's betrayal, born from a personal passion that conflicts with his oath of loyalty to Arthur, demonstrates how the strongest bonds of fellowship can be shattered by a single fracture in its moral foundation. It is a lesson in the strategic risk posed by personal failings among high-ranking officers, showing how a security breach at the top can destabilize an entire kingdom. Mordred's treachery amplifies this warning into a final, fatal catastrophe. His rebellion is the ultimate insider threat, a lesson on the dangers of neglected succession planning, unresolved grievances, and the toxic spread of ambition within one's own court. The fall of Camelot is not caused by a superior external army, but by the accumulated weight of these internal betrayals, teaching that the most formidable fortifications are useless if the enemy is already inside the gates, and that a leader's greatest responsibility is to vigilantly safeguard the integrity and unity of his own command. Through this rich tapestry of symbolism and tragedy, the Arthurian legends provided a complete curriculum on the art of rule, masterfully blending inspirational ideals with stark, pragmatic warnings about the realities of power and the human flaws that can bring even the most glorious kingdoms to ruin. While the Arthurian legends used symbolism to encode lessons on governance, the interplay between formal military doctrine and popular epic storytelling reaches its most explicit and fascinating form in the cultures of the East. Here we see a direct, powerful conversation between a foundational strategic text and the narratives that brought its principles to life for millions. The towering figure in this tradition is, of course, the ancient Chinese strategist Sun Tzu and his timeless work, The Art of War. While this treatise was a direct, almost clinical manual for generals, its profound ideas didn't stay locked away in imperial libraries. Instead, they seeped into the very bloodstream of culture through epic tales that dramatized his strategies, making them tangible, thrilling, and utterly unforgettable for everyone from farmers to future emperors. No work does this more effectively than the monumental Romance of the Three Kingdoms. This sprawling narrative of the turbulent period after the fall of the Han Dynasty is essentially a 100-chapter-long demonstration of Sun Tzu's principles in action. The epic is less concerned with the raw violence of combat and almost obsessed with the intellectual chess match that happens beforehand. It takes Sun Tzu's most famous axiom, "If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles, and turns it into the driving force behind its most beloved hero, the legendary strategist Zhuge Liang. He is the ultimate embodiment of Sun Tzu's ideal commander, a man who wins wars not with muscle but with mind. His victories are masterpieces of psychological operations and strategic deception. In one of the most famous episodes, he is tasked with defending a vulnerable city with a tiny, insignificant force against a massive invading army led by the formidable general Sima Yi. Instead of fleeing or preparing for a futile last stand, Zhuge Liang orders the city gates thrown wide open. He then ascends the ramparts, dressed in his robes, and calmly plays his lute, burning incense beside him. Sima Yi, arriving at the gates and confronted with this scene of perfect tranquility, is immediately consumed by suspicion. Convinced that such audacious confidence must conceal a devastating ambush, he orders a full and immediate retreat. Zhuge Liang wins the battle without a single soldier lifting a sword, a perfect application of Sun Tzu's teaching that the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. This focus on winning through intellect rather than attrition is a constant theme. The epic is filled with intricate ruses, double agents, and false intelligence meticulously fed to enemy commanders. Alliances are formed and broken not on whims, but through cold, calculated assessments of shifting power dynamics, another core Sun Tzu concept. The characters who succeed are those who can think several moves ahead, anticipating their opponent's reactions and turning their own expectations against them. Those who fail are the proud, the hot-headed, and the arrogant, the generals who value personal glory over the strategic objective, providing constant object lessons in what not to do. By embedding these abstract principles into the passionate rivalries and personal dramas of its iconic characters, the romance of the Three Kingdoms transformed dry strategic theory into a compelling human experience. A listener wouldn't just memorize the rule about deception, they would remember the cunning smile of Zhuge Liang as his plan unfolded, internalizing the lesson on a much deeper, emotional level. This narrative approach was a genius method of mass education. While Sun Tzu's actual text was likely studied by a small elite of scholars and officers, these epic stories functioned as a popularized version, a broadcast medium that disseminated a shared language of strategy across all layers of society. A common soldier listening to a storyteller recount the tales of Cao Cao's cunning or Liu Bei's virtuous leadership would absorb the fundamentals of operational security, the importance of terrain, and the value of morale. A merchant might recognize how the principles of competition and alliance in the stories applied to his own business dealings. This created a culture where strategic thinking wasn't confined to the military elite, but was a valued form of intelligence in everyday life. The enduring legacy of this fusion is undeniable. For centuries, these stories have been told and retold, serving as a common reference point for leadership and cunning not just in China but across all of East Asia. They stand as a testament to the most effective way to preserve and propagate knowledge. Wrap it in a story so good that people never stop wanting to hear it, ensuring that the wisdom of the past continues to guide the actions of the future. Crossing continents once more, we find another profound tradition where the very rhythm of life and the survival of kingdoms were encoded not in texts, but in the spoken word. Across the vast and diverse expanse of Africa, an immense wealth of strategic knowledge was preserved and transmitted through a powerful and dynamic oral tradition. In cultures where history, law, and philosophy were held in memory and passed from one generation to the next through performance, epic narratives and pithy proverbs became the essential vessels for military wisdom. These were not mere stories for entertainment. They were the living libraries of tactics, diplomacy, and leadership, ensuring that a community's hard-won understanding of power and conflict would never be forgotten. The great epic of Sundiata, which tells the foundation story of the Mali Empire, stands as a monumental example. On one level, it is the compelling biography of Sundiata Keita, a disabled boy who overcame immense adversity to become a mighty king and unifier. But listen with a strategist's ear, and it reveals itself as a detailed case study in statecraft and warfare. Sundiata's path to victory is not paved by brute force alone. The epic meticulously details his journey to build a powerful coalition of allies, recognizing that no leader, no matter how charismatic, can triumph in isolation. He forges bonds with different clans and ethnic groups, demonstrating the critical importance of diplomacy and inclusive leadership in building a stable power base. His famous campaign against the sorcerer King Samayoro Kante is a masterclass in intelligence gathering and exploiting an enemy's weakness. Sundiata doesn't just raise an army and march. He learns the secret of Samayoro's supernatural power and acquires the specific means to neutralize it. This transforms the final confrontation from a simple battle into a targeted operation, teaching that victory often belongs to those who possess the most complete information about their adversary. Embedded within these grand narratives are some of the most efficient teaching tools ever devised. The proverb. African oral traditions are rich with these concise, memorable phrases that encapsulate entire volumes of strategic principle into a single line. A saying like, "A single hand cannot tie a bundle," is a direct lesson in the necessity of alliance and collective action. He who is being carried does not realize how far the town is, teaches the importance of understanding logistics and the true cost of any campaign, warning leaders not to become detached from the realities their people face. When the mouse laughs at the cat, there is a hole nearby, brilliantly illustrates the principle of having a secure retreat or a tactical advantage before engaging a stronger foe. These proverbs were not abstract philosophy, they were practical, actionable wisdom, repeated at councils around fires and during storytelling performances. They conditioned young minds to think strategically, to assess risk, and to value cunning alongside courage. The performance of these stories was itself a strategic act. Griots, the revered historian bards of West Africa, were the custodians of this knowledge. They were far more than entertainers. They were advisors to kings, diplomats, and living archives. A skilled griot didn't just recite the epic of Sundiata the same way every time. They could emphasize certain episodes, perhaps the building of an alliance or a clever tactical maneuver, to subtly counsel a current ruler facing a similar challenge. This ensured the lessons remained dynamic and directly relevant to contemporary problems, allowing ancient wisdom to be applied to new threats without altering the sacred narrative itself. The rhythm of the music that often accompanied these recitations, the cadence of the language, all served as mnemonic devices, making these complex lessons unforgettable. Perhaps most ingeniously, many traditions used animal allegories to discuss sensitive tactics without provoking political offense or revealing secrets to outsiders. Tales featuring the cunning spider Anansi, the powerful elephant, or the swift hare allowed for a safe exploration of themes like deception, the value of small forces against larger ones, and the power of intelligence over strength. A story about a weak animal outsmarting a powerful predator could openly teach guerrilla tactics or the advantages of psychological warfare in a way that a literal tale about a rival human kingdom might not. This use of metaphor provided a layer of deniability and allowed for the continuous refinement of strategy under the guise of simple folklore. proving that these ancient cultures understood the value of operational security as keenly as any modern general. Now, let's bring our focus to the very cradle of Western military tradition, to the sun-baked training grounds of ancient Greece, where the education of a warrior was considered a holistic art. For a young hoplite, the heavily armored infantryman who was the backbone of the Greek city-state, his training was not confined to the weight of his shield and the thrust of his spear. It was equally forged in the rhythm of verse, in the resonant recitations of epic poetry that served as the ultimate psychological conditioning for the brutal reality of phalanx warfare. The works of Homer were not mere literature, they were a fundamental part of the military curriculum, a vocal drill that instilled the mental framework necessary for survival on the front lines. The core of hoplite combat was the phalanx, a wall of overlapping shields and interlocking spears where the survival of the individual was utterly dependent on the cohesion and discipline of the unit. A single man breaking rank could create a fatal gap, dooming his comrades on either side. This is where the Illiad became a vital training manual. While the epic features heroic duels, its most powerful lessons for a hoplite were about the catastrophic consequences of a breakdown in unity. The central plot of the entire poem is triggered by a failure of command and a fracture in the ranks, the rift between Agamnon and Achilles, the resulting losses, the faltering of the Greek line, and the relentless pressure from Hector's Trojans all served as a dramatic, unforgettable object lesson. A young soldier listening would viscerally understand that his personal honor, his time, was secondary to the integrity of the shield wall. The epic taught that true courage wasn't just individual bravery, but the discipline to hold your position, to trust the man next to you, and to advance as a single, terrifying entity. Beyond the overarching theme of cohesion, the epics provided incredibly detailed, almost technical, models of communication and coordinated action. Homer doesn't just say they fought. He describes the shouts, the signals, the way heroes rallied specific contingents, and how they shifted to reinforce a weakening part of the line. For a hoplite, this translated the abstract concept of teamwork into a vivid mental playbook. He could hear, in the cadence of the verse, the necessary calls and responses of battle. The poetry also offered a balanced view of heroism. Yes, it celebrated the superhuman prowess of an Achilles, but it also lauded the steadfast, unglamorous courage of a soldier like Telamonian Ajax, who was the embodiment of the defensive bulwark, the unbreakable man in the line who could be relied upon to stand firm against the worst onslaught. This provided aspirational models for different types of soldiers. Not everyone could be the flawless killer, but everyone could strive to be the unwavering rock upon which the formation depended. Perhaps most crucially, Homer's works did not shy away from the grim horror and profound psychological toll of combat. The epics are filled with graphic, heartbreaking descriptions of young men dying far from home, of the grief of fathers, and the emptiness of victory. This wasn't meant to deter warriors, but to inoculate them. By exposing young recruits to the visceral reality of war through narrative, it stripped away any childish illusions of glamour. They entered the phalanx not with naive excitement, but with a sober understanding of the sacrifice demanded of them. This psychological preparation was as important as physical conditioning. A soldier who has already grappled with the concept of mortality in the safety of the agora is less likely to be paralyzed by panic when he sees it on the battlefield. This narrative training, repeated in symposia and public festivals, perfectly complemented the physical drills on the training ground. The poetry provided the why, the higher purpose, the values of honor, loyalty, and remembrance, while the drill mastered the how of movement and mechanics. Together, they forged a soldier who was not just a skilled fighter, but a believing one, a man who understood his role in a tradition stretching back to the heroes of legend. He wasn't just holding a line, he was upholding a legacy, fighting alongside the ghosts of Achilles and Odysseus, making the phalanx not just a tactical formation, but a cultural and psychological one, bonded by shared story as much as by shared danger. This tradition of embedding strategy within sacred narrative finds a powerful and visually stunning parallel far across the globe in the vibrant and complex civilizations of Mesoamerica. Here, the art of warfare was intrinsically linked to the cosmos, to the divine, and to the very cycle of life itself, and this profound connection was meticulously recorded in some of history's most unique military documents, the painted codices of cultures like the Maya and the Aztecs. These were not simple books. They were elaborate, screen-folded manuscripts crafted from deer hide or fig bark paper, each page a breathtaking canvas of vivid glyphs and illustrations. To view them was to step into a world where myth and history, tactical doctrine and celestial prophecy were woven into a single, inseparable tapestry of knowledge, designed to guide the elite warrior priests who held the fate of empires in their hands. Within these sacred pages, gods and heroes did not just wield supernatural power, they demonstrated meticulously practical battlefield maneuvers. A depiction of the Maya god of lightning and warfare, Quetzalcoatl, might show him emerging from a serpent to strike an enemy, a powerful metaphor for the element of surprise and the psychological shock of a perfectly executed ambush. Scenes from the Popol Vuh, the great Mayan creation epic, are particularly rich in strategic lessons. The hero twins, Hunahpu and Xbalanque, do not overcome the lords of the underworld through brute force. Their entire journey is a masterclass in asymmetric warfare against a far more powerful foe. They outsmart their adversaries with clever ruses, like pretending to be harmless vagabonds who perform miraculous tricks, only to reveal their lethal intent at the decisive moment. They use their environment to their advantage, turning the features of the underworld itself into weapons and traps. For a Mayan noble training for command, these stories were not just religious parables, they were case studies in how intelligence, deception, and adaptability could defeat even a godlike enemy. The Aztec codices took this integration of the spiritual and the tactical to another level, often documenting actual historical campaigns with a clarity that reveals their sophisticated military science. The Codex Mendoza, for instance, includes detailed accounts of conquests, showing standardized warrior costumes that denoted rank and specialization within the army, much like a modern uniform. They illustrate the taking of prisoners for sacrifice, which was not merely a religious act but a calculated tactic of psychological warfare, designed to terrorize future opponents into submission without a fight. The codices show armies maneuvering through complex terrain, using mountains and rivers as natural fortifications and avenues of approach. They depict the logistics of campaign, with porters carrying supplies, emphasizing that a successful war was as much about sustained mobility as it was about courage in combat. Every painted scene served a dual purpose. It recorded a glorious deed for the gods while simultaneously providing a clear, replicable model for future generals. Perhaps the most profound layer of strategic wisdom in these texts was their celestial dimension. For Mesoamerican cultures, time was not a linear progression but a sacred cycle, and the movements of the stars and planets were direct messages from the gods. This astronomical knowledge was directly applied to warfare. A codex would meticulously correlate the ideal timing for a campaign with the position of Venus, the planet associated with the god Quetzalcoatl and believed to influence the outcome of conflict. Launching an attack under a specific celestial alignment was not superstition. It was considered a critical tactical advantage, akin to a modern general choosing to attack at dawn or under cover of fog. By embedding this astro-military calendar within their sacred narratives, They elevated strategy to a divine science. A warrior learned that to win a battle, he must not only master the spear and the ambush, but also understand the intricate dance of the heavens, ensuring his every move was in harmony with the fundamental order of the universe. In this way, the Mesoamerican Codex became the ultimate guide, transforming the commander who could read it into both a master tactician and a faithful servant of the cosmos. From the painted codices of Mesoamerica and the sung epics of ancient Greece, we now arrive at a time of castles, crusades, and a new kind of warrior aristocracy, where military instruction was once again cloaked in the language of honor and adventure. The sprawling, often fantastical world of medieval chivalric romances might seem, on its surface, far removed from the grim realities of warfare. These tales of knights errant, magical quests, and courtly love appear to be pure escapism. Yet, woven into their very fabric was a sophisticated system of allegory, a coded language designed to impart the complex military ethics, strategies, and logistics required of a knightly class whose primary trade was war. These stories were the essential training manuals for a society where formal military academies did not exist, using the thrilling vehicle of personal quests to teach everything from the proper angle of a lance to the immense challenges of managing a campaign 1,000 miles from home. Consider the quintessential set piece of these romances, the tournament. In stories of Charlemagne's paladins or the legendary Spanish hero El Cid, these events are never just sport. They are meticulously crafted allegories for the chaos and demands of a full-scale battle. A joust between two armored knights is a vivid, personal lesson in the physics of cavalry combat. The narrative would linger on the precise grip of the lance, the balanced seat in the saddle, the critical moment of impact on an opponent's shield or helm. This was hands-on training by proxy, emphasizing that mastery of these individual skills was the foundation of any larger victory. A knight who could unhorse his rival in the lists was rehearsing the act of breaking an enemy's cavalry charge on the field. The tournament, in its allegorical form, taught the importance of constant, rigorous practice and the direct correlation between individual prowess and collective success in a melee. But the education went far deeper than mere horsemanship. The entire concept of chivalry itself was a powerful allegorical framework that encoded a comprehensive set of rules for engagement. This code wasn't just about being polite, it was a highly practical doctrine for the realities of medieval warfare. Rules against striking a defenseless opponent taught the importance of honoring surrender to prevent battles from devolving into pointless, mutually assured slaughter. Protocols for the treatment of high-ranking prisoners of war were not merely charitable. They established a system of ransom that made warfare economically viable, turning captured knights into valuable assets rather than corpses. Even the conduct of sieges was governed by this chivalric allegory, with stories emphasizing the importance of offering terms before storming a castle, a practice that could save an army from costly and dangerous assaults. These narratives presented these hard-nosed, practical rules as matters of personal honor and divine virtue, making them more palatable and far more memorable than a simple list of military regulations. The romances also tackled the most daunting aspects of medieval warfare, the foreign campaign. Tales of knights traveling to distant, mythical lands like the Orient or fighting in the deserts during the Crusades served as elaborate training modules for the immense logistical and diplomatic challenges of fighting far from one's own resources. The hero's journey through unknown territories was an allegory for the very real problems of supply line management, foraging in hostile land, and securing fresh water and fodder for horses. Encounters with strange, often hostile, local rulers were lessons in the delicate art of forging temporary alliances, understanding alien customs and navigating the treacherous waters of local politics. The frequent theme of a cultural misunderstanding leading to conflict taught a critical strategic lesson: that intelligence about your enemy's culture, religion, and motivations was just as important as intelligence about the number of his soldiers. A knight listening to these stories would internalize the idea that a campaign was a political endeavor as much as a military one, by wrapping all of this essential knowledge in the compelling package of a personal quest, a knight proving his worth to win a lady's favor or to reclaim his stolen inheritance. These romances achieved something remarkable. They made the complex, often dry, principles of strategy, logistics, and ethics accessible and intensely engaging to a broad audience, from the lowliest squire to the highest-born duke. In a Europe fractured into countless feudal territories, each with its own petty laws and customs, this literary tradition helped standardize military practices across Christendom. A knight from England and a knight from Burgundy might speak different languages, but they shared a common understanding of the rules of ransom, the honor of siege warfare, and the ideal of chivalric conduct, all learned from the same foundational stories. This shared allegorical framework allowed them to fight together in massive coalition armies during the Crusades, creating a common professional language that transcended borders and helped forge a pan-European military culture built not on a single emperor's command, but on 1,000 shared stories. Journeying now from the chivalric courts of Europe to the majestic empires of the East, we encounter a work of such profound national and strategic importance that it is often called the identity of a people given literary form. Ferdowsi's Shahnameh, or the Book of Kings, stands as a monumental pillar of Persian culture, a sweeping epic that chronicles the destiny of a civilization from its mythical dawn to its historical zenith. But beyond its breathtaking poetry and legendary heroes, the Shahnameh functions as the most comprehensive and enduring manual on the art of kingship and imperial strategy, a guide that instructed generations of rulers on how to wield power with both strength and wisdom, ensuring their legacy would be one of justice rather than tyranny. At the very heart of this epic curriculum is the concept of far, or the divine right to rule. This wasn't a simple mandate for power. It was a sacred covenant between the king and his people, a glowing aura of legitimacy that had to be earned and maintained through just conduct, courage, and moral integrity. The Shahnameh is filled with cautionary tales of rulers who lose their far the moment they succumb to arrogance, cruelty, or poor judgment. A king who acts as a tyrant, who ignores the plight of the common folk or dismisses the counsel of his advisors, is shown to be not merely a bad leader, but a monarch actively severing his connection to the divine, dooming his reign to failure and chaos. This powerful idea taught that sustainable power is not taken, but granted by the consent of the governed and the approval of the cosmos, making ethical governance the very foundation of military and political success. The epic's ultimate hero, the mighty Rostam, serves as the living embodiment of the ideal warrior strategist, a character who demonstrates that raw strength is useless without intellect and foresight. Rostam's famous 7 labors, undertaken to rescue his king from demonic captivity, are a masterclass in tactical problem-solving. Each challenge he faces is different, requiring not brute force but adaptability, reconnaissance, and cleverness. He outwits a sorcerer, defeats a dragon by targeting its vulnerable underbelly, and navigates a treacherous desert, showing that every obstacle has a weakness waiting to be discovered by a discerning mind. Rostam is fiercely loyal, but he is never a blind servant. He is a counselor who speaks truth to power, reminding kings of their duties and the consequences of their actions. His character arc teaches that the greatest asset to a ruler is not a mindless weapon, but a thinking, ethically bound commander who understands that every victory has a moral cost. Beyond the deeds of heroes, the Shahnameh provides an incredibly detailed and practical view of ancient Persian military science, offering a veritable encyclopedia of organized warfare. Ferdowsi doesn't just mention armies, he describes them with the eye of a seasoned general. He details the precise organization of the cavalry, the backbone of the Persian army, distinguishing between heavily armored cataphracts designed to shatter enemy lines and light horse archers used for harassment and feigned retreats. The epic celebrates the sophisticated technology of the era, from the terrifying siege engines that could batter down the strongest walls to the clever use of engineering in building bridges and canals to support a campaign's logistics. These aren't throwaway lines, they are integral parts of the narrative, emphasizing that victory belongs to the side with the best organization, the most advanced technology, and the most meticulous preparation. A listener would learn that a successful campaign is a complex machine where every part, from the blacksmith to the scout, must function in perfect harmony. Perhaps the most sophisticated lesson woven throughout the epic's thousands of verses is the critical importance of strategic patience and the wise management of advisors. The greatest kings in the Shahnameh, like the wise Jamshid or the just Khosrow, are those who understand the long game. They know when to avoid a costly confrontation, when to use diplomacy instead of force, and how to turn a former enemy into a loyal ally through magnanimity and respect. Their courts are filled with a diverse council of elders, priests, generals, and wise men, each offering a different perspective. A ruler who ignores this chorus of experience, who acts on impulsive rage or selfish desire, is invariably led to disaster. The epic relentlessly teaches that a king who listens only to the sound of his own voice is a king who is already lost, for the weight of empire is too great for any one pair of shoulders to bear alone. Through its glorious tales of creation, love, and war, the Shahnameh accomplished something unparalleled. It gave a people a shared history and a common moral language, while simultaneously providing their leaders with a complete and timeless guide to the art of rule. It proved that the most effective strategy for enduring 1,000 years is to weave your lessons into a story so beautiful and essential that it becomes inseparable from the soul of the nation itself. Moving from the grand imperial strategies of Persia, we find a starkly different yet equally brilliant military tradition forged in the misty glens and dense forests of ancient Europe. Celtic myths, particularly those of the Irish Ulster cycle, present a world where victory is not measured by the size of an army, but by the cunning, ferocity, and intimate knowledge of the land possessed by a single formidable hero. These stories are masterclasses in the principles of guerrilla warfare, codifying the essential tactics for a smaller, mobile force confronting a much larger, conventionally powerful invader. They are the narrative embodiment of resistance, celebrating not the set-piece battle between two massive phalanxes, but the devastating effectiveness of the ambush, the feint, and the psychological operation. At the center of this tradition stands the ultimate Celtic warrior, Cu Chulainn. His legendary exploits are not just thrilling adventures, they are a detailed tactical manual for asymmetric combat. His most famous strategy, the defense of Ulster single-handedly against the armies of Queen Medb, is a perfect case study in leveraging terrain and mobility. He doesn't meet the vast invading force on an open field where they could surround and crush him. Instead, he uses the landscape as both a shield and a weapon. He harries the army's flanks from the cover of woods, attacks their supply lines at river crossings, and uses the fog and the darkness to conceal his movements. Each engagement is a swift, violent strike aimed at a vulnerable point, a patrol, a foraging party, a high-value champion before he melts back into the wilderness, leaving confusion and terror in his wake. This relentless campaign of attrition, this death by 1,000 cuts, serves to demoralize a superior enemy, making every step into hostile territory feel like a trap and every shadow a potential threat. Central to his effectiveness is his profound connection to the local geography. The myths constantly emphasize that Cu Chulainn knows every bog, every hidden path, every defensible hillock in his homeland. This isn't just poetic embellishment, it's the core doctrine of guerrilla warfare. His knowledge acts as a force multiplier, allowing him to control the tempo of the conflict, to choose when and where to fight, and to always have an escape route. He turns the environment itself into an ally, using it to funnel enemies into kill zones, to hide his movements, and to exhaust an opponent who is unfamiliar with the land. For the cultures that told these stories, this was a vital lesson. Your greatest advantage against a powerful empire is your home ground. A Roman legion, trained for open-field combat and siege warfare, could be rendered helpless and vulnerable when drawn into trackless forests or rugged highlands against an enemy who refused to stand and fight on conventional terms. The most visually striking and psychologically potent element of these tales is the ryostrad, or warp spasm, that overcomes Cu Chulainn in battle. This is not merely a supernatural spectacle. It is a powerful metaphor for the psychological transformation required for this kind of brutal, intimate combat. The description is horrific. His body contorts, one eye sucks into his skull while the other bulges out. His muscles swell with inhuman power, and a radiant light shines from his forehead. This transformation represents the shedding of civilian humanity to become a pure, terrifying instrument of war. It is the embodiment of battle frenzy, a state of hyper-focused, unpredictable violence designed to shatter the enemy's morale. In a conventional army, discipline is maintained through ordered ranks and synchronized movements. In guerrilla warfare, the goal is often the opposite: to create chaos, to be unpredictable, to appear not as a soldier but as a force of nature. The ryostrad is the ultimate psychological weapon, making the warrior seem unstoppable, inhuman, and utterly terrifying, thereby breaking the enemy's will to fight before a blow is even struck. By weaving these tactics into the grand, celebrated adventures of their greatest hero, Celtic cultures did more than just preserve effective military ideas. They valorized them. They made the skills of the guerrilla stealth, cunning, intimate knowledge of the land, and terrifying ferocity into the highest virtues a warrior could possess. In a world constantly under threat from larger, more centralized powers like the Romans, these narratives provided a cultural blueprint for survival. They taught that a people could never truly be conquered if they refused to fight the invaders' war, if they instead turned their homeland into a deadly labyrinth and their champions into avenging spirits of the land itself. The stories of Cu Chulainn ensured that the strategic wisdom of the underdog was not forgotten, celebrating the defiant truth that a single determined fighter, using the right tactics, could hold an entire army at bay. Imagine a world awakening from what some called a long slumber, a time when the dusty manuscripts of antiquity were being cracked open not as relics, but as urgent, vital blueprints for the future. The Renaissance was this reawakening, a fervent rebirth of classical learning that touched every facet of art, science, and philosophy. And at the very heart of this seismic shift in thinking, epic tales were not merely enjoyed as literature, they were dissected as the most sophisticated military textbooks available. After centuries where military knowledge was often fragmented and localized, European commanders and thinkers turned back to the organized, grand-scale warfare depicted in the works of Homer and Virgil, seeing in them a lost art that needed to be recovered and mastered. This wasn't an academic exercise. It was a direct response to the chaotic, mercenary-driven conflicts of the Middle Ages, a quest to find a more disciplined, more effective way to wage war. No figure embodies this fusion of classical epic and ruthless pragmatism more than Niccolò Machiavelli. While his name is synonymous with political cunning, his lesser-known work, The Art of War, is a profound testament to how deeply these ancient stories informed his thinking. He didn't just read the Iliad, he mined it for practical lessons on everything from troop morale to logistics. For Machiavelli, the catastrophic fallout between Agamnon and Achilles was the ultimate case study in failed leadership, a textbook example of how a commander's pride could cripple an entire army. He saw in the disciplined ranks of the Roman legions, celebrated in Virgil's Aeneid, the model for a new kind of military force for Florence, a citizen militia loyal to the state rather than to a mercenary captain's purse. He argued that Aeneas's piety, his unwavering sense of duty to his people and his gods, was not just a moral virtue but a strategic necessity. A leader who embodied these values would inspire greater loyalty and discipline in his troops, creating an army that was more resilient and reliable than any band of hired swords. For Machiavelli, the epics proved that the foundation of military power was not just good weapons, but good order and virtuous leadership. Across the Alps, this theoretical interest became a practical revolution on the muddy drilling fields of the Dutch Republic. Maurice of Nassau, the brilliant Dutch strategist fighting for independence from Spain, became one of the most influential military reformers in history by literally taking a page from the ancient world. Along with his cousins, he pored over classical texts, particularly the detailed descriptions of Roman military formations and drills found in the writings of historians like Vegetius, who themselves were interpreting the epic tradition. Maurice became obsessed with the idea of discipline and order, concepts he saw vividly enacted in the coordinated maneuvers of Greek and Roman heroes. He implemented a radical system of constant, repetitive drill for his troops, breaking down the complex process of loading and firing a musket into 42 distinct motions. This intense training, inspired by the discipline of ancient phalanxes and legions, allowed his smaller forces to unleash volleys of fire with a speed and coordination that overwhelmed larger Spanish tercios. His innovations, which directly lifted the concept of organized, standardized unit tactics from epic descriptions of warfare, would go on to influence military doctrine for centuries. The influence of these stories extended far beyond the battlefield and into the very culture of the Renaissance, where art became a powerful medium for military propaganda and education. Patrons like the Duke of Ferrara commissioned vast cycles of frescoes depicting scenes from the Aeneid, transforming the walls of their palaces into permanent lessons on leadership and statecraft. For a visiting ambassador or a young noble training for command, walking through these rooms was an immersive education. They would see Aeneas's perseverance, his strategic cunning in Carthage and later in Italy, and his ultimate triumph, all framed as the ideal model for a modern prince. Even the development of new technology, like artillery, was legitimized through these classical lenses. Early cannons were sometimes given names taken from epic poetry, linking their terrifying new power to the legendary siege engines of Troy. Artists depicted mythical battles with soldiers wearing contemporary armor, explicitly drawing a parallel between the heroic past and the martial present, suggesting that the virtues that won wars for Aeneas were the same ones that would secure victory for a Renaissance condottiero. This revival of epic military thought created a crucial bridge, allowing the strategic doctrines of the ancient world to flow directly into the dawn of the early modern era. The lessons weren't copied blindly, they were adapted, refined, and merged with new technologies. The pike squares that dominated European battlefields for 200 years were a direct descendant of the Greek phalanx, rediscovered through its epic celebrations. The concept of a standing, professional army, loyal to the nation-state, found its philosophical justification in the loyal, citizen soldiers of Rome praised by Virgil. The Renaissance demonstrated that these ancient narratives were not static fossils. They were living, breathing repositories of knowledge that could be consulted anew by each generation facing its own unique challenges. Their enduring power lay in this incredible flexibility, their ability to provide not just a simple tactic, but an entire framework for thinking about power, leadership, and the complex, brutal art of war itself. Across the world, as Renaissance Europe was rediscovering classical strategy through art and epic, the islands of Japan were refining their own unique and formidable warrior culture through a powerful literary tradition known as the Gunki Monogatari, or war tales. These narratives were far more than simple chronicles of battle. They were the very soul of the samurai class, a fusion of historical record, tactical manual, and profound philosophical treatise designed to shape the mind and spirit of the warrior. The most revered of these, the Tale of the Hike, is a monumental tapestry that recounts the epic Genpei War, a colossal struggle between the Terra and Minamoto clans that reshaped the nation. But to hear it recited by a Biwa Hoshi, a blind monk priest who traveled the land performing its verses, was not to receive a dry history lesson. It was to undergo an immersive education in the complete art of war, from the precise draw of a bow to the proper preparation for one's own death. At the core of these tales was the meticulous codification of what would later be formally known as Bushido, the way of the warrior. Values like loyalty, honor, and self-sacrifice were not abstract ideals. They were presented as the most practical and essential tools for survival and victory on the battlefield. The stories are filled with parables of supreme loyalty, such as the famous account of the Sasaki brothers who fought to the death to protect their lord. Conversely, tales of betrayal, like the tragic arc of the skilled but treacherous warrior Yoshinaka, serve as stark warnings that martial prowess without unwavering fidelity leads only to ruin and disgrace. This constant reinforcement of ethics ensured that a samurai's incredible martial skill was always tempered by a powerful moral compass, teaching that the most dangerous weapon was a disciplined and loyal heart. Yet the Gunki Monogatari were intensely practical. Woven into the grand drama of clan warfare are incredibly detailed descriptions of the samurai's craft. Listeners learned the distinct advantages of the longbow, the yumi, for opening engagements at a distance from horseback, a tactic that required immense strength and years of practice to master while in the saddle. The narratives then guide the warrior into the close-quarter chaos of the battlefield, where the razor-sharp katana becomes an extension of the will. The tales don't just say a warrior was skilled, they describe the specific stances, the feints, the precise angle of a killing blow, transforming each duel into a usable lesson in swordsmanship. Even the critical, often overlooked art of battlefield communication is covered, with detailed accounts of how commands were relayed through conch shell trumpets, war drums, and complex signal flags to coordinate large forces across the din and confusion of combat. Perhaps the most sophisticated lessons in these war tales are those dealing with the inner battlefield, the management of fear, fatigue, and emotion. The stories acknowledge the terror of facing certain death and offer a solution not through brute courage, but through cultivated mental discipline, often drawn from Zen Buddhism. The ideal state for a warrior was mushin, or no mind, a state of Zen-like focus where the body acts without the interference of conscious thought, fear, or hesitation. This is vividly portrayed in accounts of duels where a master swordsman wins not because he is stronger, but because his mind is utterly calm and reflective, allowing him to anticipate his opponent's moves as if seeing them in a still pond. The famous death poems composed by warriors before battle are the ultimate expression of this psychological training, demonstrating a profound acceptance of mortality that allowed them to fight with a clarity and freedom that was itself a tactical advantage. The scope of instruction extends to grand strategy as well. Through the sprawling account of the Genpei War, a young samurai learned about the complexities of protracted campaigns. He heard of the brutal realities of siege warfare, from the patience required to starve out a fortress to the cunning required to scale its walls. The naval engagement at the decisive Battle of Danura is recounted with the detail of a staff report, teaching lessons on how to use tides, currents, and whether to trap a superior enemy fleet. The tale doesn't shy away from the political dimensions of war either, offering intricate lessons on dealing with shifting alliances, the dangers of hubris after victory, and the strategic value of mercy in consolidating power. This holistic approach ensured a commander was schooled in every aspect of leadership, from the minute to the monumental. What truly elevates the Gunki Monogatari beyond mere military doctrine is their deep infusion of poetic and aesthetic sensitivity, a concept known as mono no aware, the poignant awareness of the impermanence of all things. The tale begins with the sound of the temple bell echoing the truth that all glory is fleeting, and this melancholic beauty permeates every conflict. Great warriors are also accomplished poets. Fierce battles are paused to admire the moon or a spray of cherry blossoms. This was not a contradiction but the completion of the warrior's education. It connected the violence of their profession to the broader, beautiful fragility of existence, fostering a cultured individual who could wield a sword with lethal precision while also understanding the profound transience of the power it represented. This literary tradition guaranteed that the samurai's formidable military expertise was never passed down as empty technique, but was always carried within a strong, unwavering ethical and aesthetic foundation, creating a warrior who was as complete in spirit as he was deadly in combat. This enduring tradition of learning from epic narratives isn't confined to ancient history. It is a vibrant, living practice that continues to shape the minds of military leaders in the 21st century. Walk the halls of prestigious academies like West Point, Sandhurst, or St. Cyr, and you will find that the curriculum extends far beyond ballistics and battlefield logistics. These institutions have long recognized that the greatest challenges of command are often human, not technical, and for that, they turn to a timeless library of strategic wisdom found in epic literature. Formal courses dedicated to the classics, military history, and even war literature are not elective luxuries. They are considered fundamental to forging officers who can think critically, lead with integrity, and navigate the immense moral complexities of modern conflict. These stories provide an invaluable safe space for a kind of training that no simulation can fully replicate: the examination of decision-making under extreme pressure and profound uncertainty. A cadet can study the logistical genius of the D-Day landings, but it is through the narrative of Odysseus's 20-year struggle to return home that they grapple with the psychological toll of prolonged operations, the strain of maintaining morale among exhausted followers, and the necessity of adaptable, cunning leadership when original plans completely collapse. The epic becomes a complex case study in resilience. Similarly, the command dilemma faced by Prince Arjuna on the field of Kurukshetra is not some ancient relic. It is a powerful framework for discussing the ethical weight of orders that will inevitably lead to collateral damage, or the challenge of committing troops to a mission where casualties are certain. These narratives force future leaders to confront these agonizing choices in a classroom long before they face them in reality, building a foundational ethical compass. The application of these ancient lessons is often startlingly direct. A modern instructor might use the Greek phalanx, immortalized in the Iliad, to teach the fundamental principles of unit cohesion, mutual trust, and the devastating consequences of a breach in formation, concepts directly transferable to the integrity of a modern infantry squad or a special operations team. The intricate alliance building in the Ramayana serves as a masterclass in coalition warfare, illustrating the diplomatic finesse required to manage partnered forces with different cultures, objectives, and capabilities. Even the logistical nightmares detailed in these epics, from supplying a besieging army outside Troy to the intelligence failures that doomed so many heroes, provide classic examples of operational art, teaching that ammunition and food are as important as courage, and that a single piece of overlooked intelligence can determine the fate of an entire campaign. This pedagogical bridge from the ancient to the contemporary is continually reinforced through modern adaptations. Blockbuster films like Troy or 300 and television series like Rome or Vikings, while dramatized, reintroduce these core strategic concepts to a mass audience. A viewer might be captivated by the spectacle, but they are simultaneously absorbing lessons on the use of terrain at Thermopylae, the importance of secure communications, or the psychological impact of a terrifying reputation. Novels from authors like Stephen Pressfield breathe new life into these stories, making the internal struggles of a hoplite or a legionary feel immediate and relatable. These adaptations ensure that the language of strategy, first codified in epic poetry, remains a part of our cultural conversation, constantly refreshing the well of examples from which both military professionals and interested citizens can draw. This enduring practice, stretching from the campfires of antiquity to the digital classrooms of today, validates a profound truth about human cognition. We are fundamentally wired for story. Abstract principles and dry lists of doctrine are difficult to retain and harder to apply under stress. But a well-told narrative with its emotional weight, its memorable characters, and its compelling drama etches these same lessons deep into our memory. We remember the cautionary tale of Agamnon's hubris, the cunning of Odysseus's ruses, and the tragic cost of Hector's pride. We internalize them not as historical facts, but as lived experiences. This is the ultimate power of the epic tradition in military education. It doesn't just tell future commanders what to think. It teaches them how to think, providing an endless repository of human experience upon which to build their own judgment, proving that the most advanced artificial intelligence cannot yet compete with the accumulated strategic wisdom of 3,000 years of storytelling. Beyond the drills and formations, the battlefield is ultimately a contest of wills, a place where fear and fatigue can shatter the most perfect plan. This is where epic storytelling revealed its most profound power, not as a mere instructor of tactics, but as a master architect of the warrior's mind. These narratives were a sophisticated form of psychological conditioning, meticulously crafted to forge unbreakable morale and a resilient identity long before a single blow was ever struck. They transformed the abstract terror of combat into a familiar landscape already navigated by legendary heroes, providing a crucial mental map for the chaos to come. At its core, this process was about forging a powerful collective identity. A young Greek hoplite listening to the Iliad wasn't just hearing a story, he was being shown his lineage. He was a descendant of Achilles and Ajax, inheriting their valor and their burden. A samurai immersed in the tale of the hike understood his place in a long, honorable tradition of clan loyalty that stretched back generations. These stories answered the most fundamental and terrifying questions a warrior could face. Who am I? Why am I here? The epics provided a resounding answer. You are part of something immortal. Your actions today will be remembered and recounted like those of the heroes you admire. This instilled a profound sense of purpose that transcended personal survival, motivating fighters to endure hardships and face dangers they would never consider for themselves alone. It was the ultimate antidote to the paralyzing selfishness of fear. This identity was reinforced through the masterful use of archetypes and recurring motifs, which functioned as mental shortcuts for complex values. The cunning strategist like Odysseus taught that brains were as vital as brawn. The loyal friend like Patroclus or Enkidu modeled the sacred bond of brotherhood that was essential for unit cohesion. The self-sacrificing hero who gave his life for his comrades, a trope found in virtually every tradition, provided the ultimate template for duty. By encountering these archetypes again and again in different stories, warriors internalized a clear ethical and behavioral code. They knew on a visceral level what was expected of them. In the heat of battle, they didn't need to deliberate over a moral dilemma. They could ask themselves, what would Hector do? Or how would Rostam act? The story had already provided the answer, allowing for split-second decisions aligned with their culture's highest ideals. The ritual of reciting these tales before a battle was a deliberate and powerful tool for mental preparation. Imagine the scene. On the eve of a confrontation, warriors gathered around a fire as a bard or a commander invoked the great deeds of their ancestors. This was not simple entertainment, it was a psychological priming ritual. It stirred emotions of pride, anger, and a desire for glory, effectively heightening arousal and focus for the conflict ahead. It bonded the group together in a shared emotional experience, reminding each individual that they were fighting for the person beside them as much as for any king or cause. This communal reinforcement of identity and purpose was a potent force multiplier, turning a collection of individuals into a single, determined entity. Perhaps the most sophisticated psychological function of these epics was their role as a mechanism for processing trauma. Warfare is not just physically destructive, it is psychologically corrosive, filled with ethical ambiguities, profound loss, and unimaginable stress. The stories gave warriors a framework to make sense of this chaos. The grief of Achilles over Patroclus gave a name and a shape to the pain of losing a comrade. The tragic fate of so many heroes in the Shahnameh or the Mahabharata acknowledged the brutal reality that victory often comes with a terrible cost, and that even the greatest are not immune to suffering. By engaging with these narratives, soldiers could confront their own fears and potential grief in a safe, controlled environment. They could experience a catharsis, a purging of pity and terror, that left them mentally clearer and more prepared for the emotional toll of their profession. The stories assured them that their complex feelings were not a sign of weakness, but a shared human response to the horrors of war, and that even gods and demigods had struggled with the same burdens. This deep psychological resonance ensured that epic storytelling was far more than a pastime. It was an essential, non-negotiable component of military culture, building the mental and emotional fortitude that was every bit as important as strength or skill. Now, let's set our course for the open ocean, where the challenges of warfare and survival take on an entirely different dimension. For maritime cultures, the sea was not just a battlefield. It was a vast, unpredictable, and often malevolent force that demanded its own unique set of strategies. Without the stable ground of a conventional army, ancient admirals and explorers turned to a different kind of manual, the seafaring epic. these weren't mere adventure stories. They were sophisticated, narrative-based training programs that encoded generations of hard-won naval wisdom, ensuring that the art of surviving and conquering at sea would never be lost to the depths. Consider Homer's Odyssey, the quintessential sea story. While we often focus on Odysseus's cunning and his encounters with mythical creatures, the entire epic is, at its core, a masterclass in naval leadership and survival. Every island he visits, every storm he weathers, is a lesson in a different aspect of maritime command. When his fleet is blown off course, we learn about the critical importance of dead reckoning and maintaining a sense of direction even when landmarks vanish. His disastrous encounter with the Laestrygonians, where entire ships are destroyed in a hostile harbor, serves as a stark warning about the dangers of poor reconnaissance and anchoring in unknown, unprotected waters without first sending a small scout party. The epic even delves into the brutal psychology of long voyages, detailing the mutiny of his men on the island of Thrinacia when they slaughter the sacred cattle of the sun god Helios. This isn't just a moral failing, it's a case study in the breakdown of discipline and the catastrophic consequences of a commander losing control of his crew's morale and hunger during a prolonged journey with dwindling supplies. This tradition of oceanic instruction is universal. In the Arabian Nights, the 7 voyages of Sinbad the sailor function as a structured curriculum for a merchant marine. Each voyage escalates in complexity, teaching a new layer of strategic thinking. His encounters aren't random, they are carefully designed scenarios. When Sinbad is stranded on an island that turns out to be a massive sleeping whale, the lesson is about constant vigilance and understanding that the sea itself can be deceptive. His ingenious escape from the giant rock by tying himself to its leg is a lesson in using an enemy's own strength and mobility against them. Later voyages teach advanced resource management, like rationing water on a long drift or bargaining with native tribes for provisions, and the critical importance of crew coordination during a crisis, such as repelling boarders or navigating a ship through a narrow strait filled with hazards. Sinbad's stories celebrate not just wealth, but the accumulated knowledge that makes acquiring that wealth possible. Beyond tactics for combat or trade, these epics served as the primary textbooks for the complex sciences of navigation and meteorology. Long before the invention of the sextant or detailed nautical charts, sailors relied on a deep, intuitive understanding of the natural world, knowledge that was perfectly preserved in verse. The Odyssey is filled with references to using the stars for guidance. Odysseus is specifically told by the goddess Calypso to keep the constellation Ursa Major, the Great Bear, on his left hand to navigate eastward. This isn't poetic flourish, it's a direct instruction in celestial navigation, teaching listeners how to use the fixed points in the night sky as a cosmic compass. Similarly, the stories are meticulous in their descriptions of weather signs. The sudden shift in wind before a storm, the behavior of birds indicating nearby land, the color of the water signaling shallow reefs. All of this essential, life-saving data was woven into the narrative, making it impossible to forget. A sailor wouldn't just remember a rule about red skies at morning. He would remember the vivid story of a hero who ignored that sign and faced the wrath of Poseidon, internalizing the lesson through emotional association. The ultimate virtue these seafaring epics champion is adaptability. On land, a general can choose his ground and prepare his defenses. At sea, the environment is in constant flux, and the enemy can emerge from any horizon or from beneath the waves themselves. The heroes of these stories succeed not through rigid plans, but through fluid intelligence. Odysseus must constantly invent new solutions to unprecedented problems, whether it's plugging his crew's ears with wax to pass the sirens or devising the escape from the Cyclops' cave by hiding under sheep. This mental flexibility, this ability to think on your feet when your entire world is pitching and rolling, was the most crucial skill a mariner could possess. By embedding this core doctrine within the most thrilling survival stories a culture could produce, ancient civilizations ensured that every new generation of sailors would inherit not just a list of rules, but a resilient, adaptable mindset, ready to face the boundless and terrifying wonder of the sea. While we often picture ancient battlefields as exclusively male domains, the truth woven into epic tales reveals a far more nuanced and powerful reality. Women were not merely passive observers or prizes to be won in these grand narratives. They were often the master strategists, the keepers of crucial intelligence, and the moral compasses guiding entire campaigns. Their inclusion was not an afterthought, but a deliberate acknowledgement that the art of war required a diversity of thought that extended far beyond the front lines, offering vital lessons in diplomacy, psychological insight, and long-term planning that brute force alone could never achieve. Consider the goddess Athena in Greek mythology. She isn't just a patron of wisdom, she is the ultimate military advisor, a divine embodiment of strategic cunning. In the Iliad, she repeatedly descends to the battlefield not to fight directly, but to guide the heroes at critical junctures. She helps Odysseus and Diomedes plan a night raid on the Trojan camp, a classic special operations mission that requires stealth and precision over raw power. Her most profound intervention is psychological. She appears to Achilles and checks his rage, preventing him from drawing his sword on Agamnon and fracturing the Greek alliance beyond repair. In this single act, Athena demonstrates a strategic principle any general would envy: the ability to manage the volatile human elements of command, to de-escalate a crisis and preserve the cohesion of the entire force. She represents the crucial understanding that the greatest threats can often come from within your own ranks, and that the most important battles are sometimes won with words, not weapons. This theme of female strategic authority echoes powerfully through the cold halls of Norse legend. The Valkyries are not just mythic escorts to Valhalla. They are Odin's chosen field agents, deciding who lives, who dies, and who is worthy to join the eternal army of the slain. They are active participants in the orchestration of fate itself. Even more striking is the figure of Brunhild in the Volsunga saga. She is no damsel in distress. She is a shield maiden, a commander of warriors who lays out conditions for her own marriage that involve defeating her in battle. She operates from a position of immense personal agency and martial authority, challenging the very notion that leadership is inherently masculine. Her story, and those of the Valkyries, taught Norse society that the capacity for tactical brilliance and command presence was not limited by gender, and that a woman's judgment on matters of war could be as formidable as any man's. Perhaps the most complex and politically astute example comes from the Indian epic, the Mahabharata. Draupadi, the wife of the 5 Pandava brothers, is far more than a queen. She is the living, breathing heart of their cause and their most shrewd political advisor. Her public humiliation in the Kaurava court is the catalytic event that makes the Great War inevitable, but her role is not merely that of a victim. Throughout the ensuing conflict and the long exile that precedes it, she is a constant voice for righteous action and strategic patience. She challenges her husbands when they waver, reminding them of their duty and their honor. She understands the long game of politics and power in a way that complements the brothers' martial skills. Her resilience and sharp intellect ensure that the Pandavas' campaign is not just a fight for a kingdom, but a crusade for justice, giving their struggle its moral and ideological foundation. Draupadi embodies the lesson that a war's casus belli, its reason for being, is as critical to victory as the army that fights it, and that maintaining the ethical high ground is a strategic advantage of immense power. By weaving these formidable female characters into their foundational stories, ancient cultures accomplished something profound. They created role models that legitimized the idea of women as strategic thinkers and influencers, ensuring that these crucial military and political lessons resonated with the entire population, not just half of it. A young girl listening to these tales would absorb the same principles of cunning, resilience, and leadership as her brothers, internalizing the understanding that her mind was a weapon to be honed. These narratives provided a sanctioned space to explore the immense value of different perspectives, arguing implicitly that the best strategy emerges from a council that includes all forms of intelligence: the analytical, the intuitive, the diplomatic, and the fiercely protective. This ensured that the epic tradition remained a truly comprehensive library of wisdom, one that prepared a society not just to win a battle, but to survive and thrive through the full spectrum of human conflict. While the clash of spears and the roar of battle dominate the surface of these ancient stories, a far more subtle and sophisticated art was being practiced in the shadow of the epic's great conflicts, the delicate, high-stakes game of diplomacy. A great commander needed to be more than a master of the battlefield. He had to be a shrewd negotiator, a cunning alliance broker, and a perceptive reader of political currents. These skills were not learned in a vacuum. They were encoded within the very narratives that celebrated martial glory, providing a comprehensive education in the arts of peace that were just as vital to a nation's security as any army. Consider the intricate political landscape of Homer's Iliad. The entire war begins with a catastrophic diplomatic failure, the violation of the sacred guest-host relationship when Paris abducts Helen from the home of Menelaus. This single act is presented not just as a personal insult, but as a profound breach of international law and religious custom, a case study in how one leader's transgression can plunge entire continents into a decade of bloody conflict. But the epic doesn't stop there. It is filled with moments of attempted negotiation. The elderly Trojan king Priam's heartbreaking journey into the Greek camp to ransom the body of his son Hector is one of the most powerful scenes in all of literature. It is a masterclass in diplomatic approach. Priam doesn't come as a king to a general. He comes as a father to a son, appealing to the universal humanity in Achilles. He kisses the hands that killed his child, a gesture of sublime humility that completely disarms Achilles' rage and allows for a temporary truce. This scene teaches that the most effective diplomacy often requires setting aside pride, acknowledging shared suffering, and finding a common language that transcends the immediate context of war. This theme of diplomatic wisdom is even more pronounced in Ferdowsi's Shahnameh. The Persian epic is replete with councils of war where the greatest heroes are not those who shout the loudest for battle, but those who offer the most sage counsel. The wise vizier is a recurring and revered figure whose advice on patience, strategic marriage alliances, and the careful management of rival princes is often the difference between a kingdom's golden age and its collapse. The consequences of ignoring such counsel are starkly illustrated. When the legendary hero Rostam feels his honor has been slighted by the foolish young king Cavus, he doesn't raise a rebellion. He writes a magnificent letter of admonition, outlining the king's failings and the proper duties of a ruler. This act, known as the Letter of Rostam, is a celebrated piece of Persian literature in its own right, modeling how a subordinate can critique authority with respect, eloquence, and powerful logic to avert a political crisis and steer a leader back to the path of justice. These narratives also provide detailed lessons in the granular aspects of statecraft. The sending and receiving of ambassadors is a frequent plot point, and the stories carefully model the protocols and pitfalls of these exchanges. An ambassador must be eloquent, observant, and unflappable, capable of delivering unwelcome news without provoking instant retaliation. They must be skilled in reading the mood of a foreign court, understanding the factions at play, and identifying potential allies. The epics show that the gifts an ambassador brings, and the way they are presented, are not mere formalities but crucial tools of psychological persuasion and symbolic communication. A carefully chosen gift could signal respect, warn of power, or suggest the terms of a potential alliance without a word being spoken. Furthermore, the stories are filled with examples of strategic marriage alliances, where political unions are carefully arranged to secure borders, end long-standing feuds, or integrate conquered peoples, demonstrating that the bedchamber could be as important as the battlefield in building a stable empire. Ultimately, the greatest lesson these tales impart is that war is almost always a failure of diplomacy. The epic cycles repeatedly show that the most devastating conflicts arise from broken oaths, disregarded advice, and arrogant leaders who refuse to negotiate in good faith. The tragic fates that befall these arrogant kings serve as the ultimate cautionary tales. By embedding these complex lessons in statecraft within the same thrilling stories that taught how to wield a sword, ancient cultures ensured their leaders received a holistic education. A ruler learned that true power was not just the ability to conquer, but the wisdom to know when not to fight, the skill to build a durable peace, and the foresight to secure his kingdom's future through the clever, patient, and often unheralded arts of diplomacy. Yet for all their terrifying power, the true story of a siege was never just about the machines outside the walls. It was about the human endurance within them. The epic narratives force us inside the besieged city, making us feel the slow, grinding horror of a prolonged blockade. We experience the dwindling food supplies, the spread of disease, and the creeping despair that turns neighbor against neighbor. Homer doesn't just show us the Greek army waiting. He shows us the faces of Trojan women and children, the arguments among the city elders, and the agonizing choices faced by those trapped. This dramatic emphasis on the psychological dimension was a crucial lesson for any would-be conqueror or defender. A successful siege required not just the strength to break walls, but the patience to break spirits to outlast the enemy's will to resist. Conversely, for a defender, the lesson was about leadership under duress, maintaining hope, rationing supplies, and preventing internal rebellion when all seems lost. The story becomes a manual on managing morale, teaching that the strongest fortifications are useless if the people behind them lose the heart to fight. This focus on the human element within stone walls finds its ultimate expression in the sprawling medieval romances that emerged centuries later. While the Illiad gave us the archetype, these later tales built an entire world around the castle, transforming it from a simple backdrop into a central character in the drama of warfare. The romances are obsessed with the architectural specifics of fortification, detailing the strategic purpose of every feature. The high curtain wall wasn't just tall, it was designed to maximize the angle of archer fire and to be incredibly difficult to scale under a hail of arrows. The narrow, slit-like windows of a keep weren't just for defense, they were carefully positioned kill zones for crossbowmen. The gatehouse, with its complex series of portcullises, murder holes, and twisting entranceways, was a death trap designed to neutralize an enemy's numerical advantage, funneling them into a vulnerable column where they could be picked apart. By weaving these technical details into the fabric of their stories, perhaps as the setting for a heroic last stand or a clandestine midnight infiltration. The bards were providing an immersive education in military engineering. A young knight listening would learn to instantly assess a castle's strengths and weaknesses, understanding that to assault one was to solve a deadly, three-dimensional puzzle. The narratives also catalogue the relentless innovation in siege engine technology, dramatizing an ancient arms race between those who built walls and those who sought to tear them down. Beyond the classic trebuchet, stories featured massive movable siege towers known as belfries, which were essentially multi-story wooden castles on wheels designed to roll up to a fortress wall and disgorge soldiers directly onto the battlements. We hear of massive armored rams protected by covered sheds called sows that would pound relentlessly at a gatehouse or a vulnerable section of wall. Perhaps most ingeniously, the romances are filled with tales of mining, the practice of digging tunnels beneath a fortress's foundations to collapse them or to send a team of soldiers up into the very heart of the enemy's stronghold. These weren't just exciting plot devices, they were detailed lessons in applied physics and counter-engineering. Defenders, in turn, are shown developing their own countermeasures, digging countermines to intercept the attackers underground, using hoists to drop massive stones on the rams to shatter them, or setting the wooden siege towers ablaze with fire arrows or pots of Greek fire. Each story became a hypothetical scenario, a mental simulation that taught a commander to think several steps ahead, anticipating the enemy's adaptations and preparing counter-strategies of their own. Perhaps the most profound strategic lesson embedded in these epic sieges is the absolute necessity of logistics. Our army could have the finest trebuchets and the bravest knights, but if it ran out of food or its supply lines were cut, the entire campaign would collapse into disaster. The stories constantly remind us of this reality. The Greek camp at Troy is a vast 10-year-long logistical operation that requires a constant flow of supplies from across the Aegean Sea. The narratives show us the vulnerable ships, the foraging parties, and the critical need to secure fresh water. This emphasis on the unglamorous backbone of warfare, the supply train, was a vital corrective to the glory of individual combat. It taught that a general's brilliance was measured as much by his ability to feed his army as to lead it in a charge. For the defenders, the lesson was about preparation. A well-provisioned castle with deep granaries and a secure water source, like a spring within its walls, could hold out for months or even years, turning a siege into a war of attrition that the attacker might not be able to win. By dramatizing these extended, grueling contests, the epics ensured that the most fundamental rule of warfare was never forgotten. Strategy begins with the stomach. A hungry army, no matter how courageous, is a defeated army. Yet for all the focus on cunning maneuvers and battlefield glory, the most profound and lasting lessons embedded within these epic tales often revolved around a far more difficult conquest, the one a warrior had to wage within himself. Beyond the logistics of supply lines and the diagrams of siege engines, these stories served as the ancient world's most sophisticated training ground for the human conscience, providing a crucial moral compass to guide the immense and terrifying power of organized violence. They understood that an army without a shared ethical foundation was just a mob, and a victory without honor was a hollow, fleeting thing. This deep engagement with the moral and ethical dimensions of conflict elevated the epic from a simple manual of tactics to a profound philosophical exploration of what it means to wield power justly. At the heart of this instruction was the complex and nuanced concept of dharma in the Indian epic, the Mahabharata. This Sanskrit term is often loosely translated as duty or righteousness, but its meaning is far more intricate, representing the cosmic law that upholds order and harmony. For a warrior, his Kshatriya dharma was his sacred duty to fight for a just cause and to protect his people. Yet the epic brilliantly demonstrates that this duty is never simple or absolute. The entire narrative is built upon a series of painful ethical dilemmas, forcing its characters, and by extension, its audience, to confront the terrible choices war demands. The most famous of these is Arjuna's crisis on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, where he sees his own teachers, cousins, and elders arrayed against him, and questions the very righteousness of the war. Lord Krishna's ensuing discourse, the Bhagavad Gita, doesn't offer an easy answer. Instead, it provides a framework for ethical action. Fight, not out of hatred or desire for personal gain, but as an offering of your skill to a cause greater than yourself, while remaining detached from the fruits of your actions. This taught that the most ethical warrior was not the one who avoided conflict, but the one who engaged in it with a pure heart and a clear understanding of his role within a larger cosmic order, ensuring that his violence served a purpose beyond mere destruction. A similar, though strikingly different, ethical framework operated in the Greek world with the concept of kleos, or glory. In the Iliad, a warrior's ultimate goal is to perform deeds so heroic that his fame will be sung for generations, granting him a form of immortality. This pursuit of glory could be a powerful motivator for courage and excellence. However, Homer's genius lies in his unflinching portrayal of its dark side. The rage of Achilles, sparked by a slight to his honor, leads him to withdraw from the battle, causing the needless deaths of countless comrades. Later, his unchecked fury after Patroclus's death drives him to commit sacrilege against Hector's body, an act that appalls even the gods. The epic doesn't celebrate this, it presents it as a tragic corruption of the heroic ideal. Achilles ultimately learns the limits of kleos when the grieving King Priam reminds him of their shared humanity, leading to a moment of profound empathy and the return of Hector's body for proper burial. This powerful conclusion teaches that glory untempered by compassion and respect for divine and human law is a hollow and ultimately self-destructive force. The true hero is the one who can balance his thirst for fame with a deeper understanding of his place in a world governed by forces larger than his own pride. These narratives are also filled with stark warnings about the consequences of ignoring these ethical boundaries. The tragic fates of figures who succumb to excessive brutality or hubris serve as powerful object lessons for any aspiring leader. In the Odyssey, the crew of Odysseus perish because of their own greed and disobedience when they slaughter the sacred cattle of the sun god Helios, a direct violation of a sworn oath. The Epic of Gilgamesh shows a tyrant transformed only after he learns empathy through loss and suffering, illustrating that a ruler who exploits his people is not truly powerful but deeply flawed. These stories consistently argue that unrestrained aggression and a failure to respect the limits of power inevitably lead to downfall, either through divine retribution, internal rebellion, or simply the unraveling of the bonds of loyalty that hold an army together. They taught that discipline wasn't just about following orders on the battlefield. It was about internalizing a code of conduct that prevented a victorious army from becoming a plague upon the land it conquered, ensuring that peace, when it came, could actually take root. This integration of ethics into thrilling narrative was a masterstroke of psychological persuasion. A dry list of rules from a legal code could be forgotten or ignored. But a listener would never forget the heartbreaking image of old King Priam kneeling in the dirt to kiss the hands of Achilles, or the inner torment of Arjuna as he lowered his bow in despair. These emotional, visceral experiences made the abstract principles of justice, mercy, and restraint unforgettable. They ensured that a warrior's education was not merely technical, but also deeply moral, shaping him into a leader who understood that the ultimate objective of any campaign was not just to win, but to establish a legitimate and sustainable peace. By pairing strategic genius with ethical responsibility, the epic tradition provided a complete education for the soul of a commander, proving that the most enduring victories are those that are not only clever but also right. But what happens when a civilization's most advanced military technology is lost to time, when the intricate craft of forging a unique sword or mixing a terrifying incendiary weapon is forgotten after a single generation? This is where the epic tale performs one of its most ingenious acts of preservation, not through precise blueprints, but through the dazzling veil of mythological exaggeration. Some of the most fantastical elements in these stories, the unbreakable armor, the city-leveling arrows, the fire-breathing monsters, may not be pure invention. Instead, they could be the cultural echo of real but lost martial technologies, their true nature blurred and amplified by centuries of retelling into something that feels like magic to a later age. This narrative strategy ensured that the concept of a powerful capability was never entirely forgotten, even if the precise instructions for recreating it were. Consider the staggering array of astras or divine weapons described in the Indian epics. The Mahabharata speaks of the Brahmastra, a projectile so devastating it could destroy entire continents and render the land barren for generations. It's described with the language of divinity, a weapon granted by a god and invoked with sacred chants. But what if this was the mythological packaging for a terrifyingly advanced piece of ancient artillery, or even a form of primitive chemical or radiological warfare? The detailed descriptions of its aftereffects, the land becoming barren and unable to support life, are chillingly specific. They don't align with the immediate, fiery destruction of a conventional explosion, but rather with a lingering, poisonous contamination. This suggests the tale might be preserving a memory, however distorted, of a real technology whose principle was understood but whose manufacturing process was eventually lost, perhaps because it was too dangerous or too complex to maintain. The story keeps the terrifying idea alive that such a power once existed and could theoretically exist again. This pattern of exaggeration extends to descriptions of warriors and their foes. The larger-than-life heroes and the monstrous creatures they battle could easily serve as symbolic stand-ins for specialized military units or tools that were awe-inspiring in their time. The Greek Cyclops, a giant with a single eye in the middle of its forehead, might be a brilliant metaphor for a highly specialized siege unit. Imagine a team of soldiers operating a massive, wheeled battering ram, a huge log tipped with a heavy metal point. As they maneuver it toward a city gate, they would be peering out from a protected, enclosed structure, a single, dark opening that could easily be mythologized by terrified defenders as a single, glaring eye. The creature's immense strength and brutality would then perfectly capture the terrifying, seemingly unstoppable nature of this specific siege engine. Similarly, accounts of giants in numerous traditions could be the amplified memory of encountering an enemy tribe of particularly tall and powerful warriors, or more likely, the first terrifying encounter with war elephants by cultures that had never seen them before. To an infantryman facing a charge of armored elephants with towers full of archers on their backs, the description of fighting living, breathing mountains would be not just poetic, but entirely literal. Even the seemingly magical properties of legendary armor and weapons can be reinterpreted through this lens. The Norse god Thor's belt, Mejingjöð, which doubled his strength, might be a mythological representation of an early form of reinforced exoskeletal armor, or a leveraged harnessing system that allowed a warrior to wield a far heavier weapon or shield than would normally be possible. The famous impenetrable armor of various heroes could be an exaggerated account of an early and exceptionally effective form of lamella or scale mail that was so superior to the common protections of the era that it seemed to observers to be divinely invulnerable. By encoding these technological advantages in the language of divine gifts or supernatural traits, the stories preserved the outcome, a warrior of immense strength, a shield that cannot be pierced, long after the specific engineering or metallurgical knowledge that created the advantage had faded from common use. The tale holds onto the strategic goal, the desired effect, even as the method for achieving it becomes a mystery. This ensured that the ambition for such technology never died, serving as a perpetual challenge and a seed of inspiration for future generations of inventors and smiths who heard these stories and wondered if such wonders could be made real once more. But these epic traditions were never locked away in isolation, sealed within the borders of a single culture. They were living, breathing entities that traveled, and in their journeys, they performed one of their most vital functions, the cross-cultural exchange of military ideas. Just as spices, silk, and precious metals flowed along the great trade routes of the ancient world, so too did stories, and woven into their very fabric were the strategic doctrines of entire civilizations. An epic tale was the ultimate portable technology, a compact and highly engaging vessel that could carry the essence of a nation's military science across deserts, over mountains, and beyond oceans, allowing societies separated by vast distances to learn from one another's triumphs and failures without ever needing to go to war themselves. The most powerful example of this phenomenon is the incredible journey of the legends surrounding Alexander the Great. Within a generation of his death, his life had already been transformed into a mythical epic, the Alexander Romance, a sprawling narrative that blended historical fact with fantastical adventure. This story did not stay in Greece. It spread like wildfire, traveling with merchants, diplomats, and soldiers along the very routes Alexander himself had conquered. As it moved east into Persia, the narrative was absorbed and adapted, with Alexander, or Iskandar, becoming a figure in Persian epic tradition, sometimes even being woven into the lineage of kings in the Shahnameh. His tactical innovations, particularly his use of the combined arms, approached the seamless integration of infantry, cavalry, and siege engines, became a subject of study and emulation. In India, his encounters with King Porus were dramatized, offering lessons on how to confront a powerful enemy fielding war elephants, a terrifying new weapon for a European army. The story of Alexander became a universal textbook, a single narrative through which cultures from the Mediterranean to the Indus Valley could access and debate Hellenistic military thought, adapting his principles of rapid maneuver, psychological warfare, and logistical planning to their own unique context. The highways for this exchange of strategic stories were the great trade networks of antiquity, with the Silk Road standing as the most famous and influential. A caravan did not just carry bolts of silk and sacks of spices, it carried ideas. A merchant resting at a caravanserai in Samarkand might entertain his hosts and fellow travelers with tales from his homeland, perhaps a story from the Indian Mahabharata, with its descriptions of complex battlefield formations and the ethical dilemmas of command. A Chinese official stationed on the western frontier might hear a version of the Trojan Horse and bring that concept of strategic deception back to his own commanders. These stories were not passively consumed, they were actively mined for useful knowledge. The nomadic steppe peoples, masters of horse archery and mobile warfare, found their hit and run tactics and their use of mounted scouts celebrated and explained in the epics of other cultures who had learned to fear their methods through bitter experience. Conversely, settled empires with their sophisticated siegecraft saw their technologies, the building of trebuchets, the digging of sapper tunnels mythologized in the stories of the very nomads who struggled to defend against them. The Silk Road was not just an economic network, it was a sprawling, informal, and incredibly effective academy for military innovation, with a curriculum written in verse and prose. This cross-pollination enriched military thought in every direction, introducing revolutionary new ideas that would reshape the art of war. The heavily armored cavalryman, the cataphract, who would later become the backbone of both Persian and Byzantine armies, likely had his origins in the interactions between the steppe nomads and the settled empires of the Middle East, with stories of his terrifying shock value spreading west. Techniques for building and countering massive siege engines traveled from the empires of the Mediterranean to South Asia, influencing the design of fortifications and the conduct of warfare for centuries. Perhaps most importantly, these exchanges dealt with the unglamorous but utterly vital science of logistics, the management of supply lines, the establishment of supply depots, and the movement of large armies across inhospitable terrain. The epic of a campaign's success or failure often hinged on these details, and a culture listening to a foreign tale could learn critical lessons about how to keep an army fed, equipped, and mobile, which was often the real key to victory. In this way, epic tales became the world's first truly globalized repository of strategic knowledge. They transcended the linguistic barriers that would have made the direct translation of a dry military manual impossible for most. They leaped over political boundaries and religious differences, carrying their insights to both ally and potential adversary. A story could convey the principle of a tactic, the value of surprise, the importance of terrain, the power of deception, in a way that was instantly understandable and utterly unforgettable, regardless of the listener's native tongue. This constant, fluid exchange of narratives ensured that military thought never became stagnant or parochial. It was a continuous conversation happening across continents and centuries, with each culture adding its own verse, its own hard-won insight to the greatest story ever told, the endless, evolving story of how human societies have sought to protect themselves, to project their power, and to navigate the brutal, complex, and inescapable reality of conflict. From the cunning of the Trojan horse to the profound psychological doctrines of Sun Tzu, we've journeyed through a hidden world where myth and military science are inseparably intertwined. These epic tales were far more than simple entertainment. They were the sophisticated, resilient, and dynamic academies of the ancient world. Through the rhythmic verses of Homer, the philosophical dialogues of the Mahabharata, and the symbolic adventures of Arthurian knights, generations of leaders absorbed complex lessons on strategy, logistics, ethics, and command without ever cracking a formal textbook. This narrative method was a stroke of genius, ensuring that the most crucial knowledge for survival and power was not just memorized, but felt, internalized, and passed down through the very heart of a culture's identity. The techniques these stories championed are not relics of a distant past. The emphasis on psychological operations, the value of asymmetric warfare, the critical importance of understanding an enemy's culture and morale, these are the cornerstones of modern military and geopolitical strategy. A special forces commander planning a mission employs the same principles of deception and surprise that Morgiana used against the 40 thieves. A corporate leader navigating a competitive market would be wise to study the alliance building of Lord Rama or the patient narrative strategy of Scheherazade. The epic tradition teaches us that whether the battlefield is a field of clay, a corporate boardroom, or the human heart, the fundamental principles of conflict and persuasion remain unchanged. They are timeless because they are rooted in a deep understanding of human nature itself. This revelation invites us to engage with these ancient stories in a completely new way. The next time you open a copy of the Iliad or watch a film adaptation of these legends, I urge you to look past the surface-level drama of gods and monsters. Instead, listen for the strategic subtext. Ask yourself what Sun Tzu would say about Odysseus's cunning, or how the defense of Ulster by Cu Chulainn mirrors modern guerrilla tactics. You'll find that these narratives are layered with a depth and purpose that transforms them from simple folklore into some of the most ingenious teaching tools ever created by human civilization. I'd love to hear what you discovered on this journey. What was the most surprising strategic lesson you found hidden in a myth? Do you have a favorite epic character who you now see as a master tactician? Share your thoughts and insights in the comments below. Let's continue unraveling these secrets together. If you enjoyed this exploration into the hidden wisdom of the past, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next adventure into the forgotten corners of history and mythology. Thank you for watching.